at the court, getting the staff squared away and getting all of you connected to the meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody to the February 19, 2021 meeting of the Nevada Sentencing Commission. I know some may ask, why are we conducting a meeting during the legislative session? But as you know, we're operating under statutory guidelines that require our meetings to be conducted throughout the year. And so appreciate everybody's accommodation and your willingness to be available today for the meeting. As usual, we have a pretty robust agenda. I'm asked to remind everybody to mute your device while you're not talking, and unmute the device, of course, if you intend to speak during the meeting. State your name so that we have it for the record, and this will assist everybody in identifying the speaker and for us preparing the minutes. I'm going to open agenda item number 2, which is the first of 2 public comment periods. One will be now, of course, and the other will be at the end of the meeting. Members of the public have 2 options for submitting public comment. First, members of the public may do so in writing by emailing the Department of Sentencing Policy at sentencingpolicy@ndsp.nv.gov. Public comment received in writing will be provided to the commission and included by reference in the minutes of the meeting. And I believe Rhonda has done that before today's meeting so far. Then members of the public who wish to testify may do so by telephone. Due to time constraints, public comment will be limited to 2 minutes. To any member of the public that exceeds the 2-minute limit, you may submit comments in writing to the Department of Public Policy. Before we get into the public comments and Rhonda begins to open the lines for those who wish to speak to the commission, we need to do a roll call. So, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Arascata?
Present.
Ms. Brady?
Present.
Director Cafarata?
I'm here.
Director Daniels?
I'm present.
Chairman Dorico? Judge Freeman?
Present.
Mr. Hicks?
Present.
Mr. Imlay?
Present.
Dr. Lanterman?
Present.
Chief Lawson?
Present.
Sheriff Logan?
Present.
Mr. Marsh? Mr. McCormick?
Present.
Ms. Moll?
Present.
Dr. Neighbors? Mr. Ponder? Judge Villani? Assemblywoman Wynn? Senator Cannizzaro? Senator Pickard? Vice Chair Callaway?
He is excused. He's participating in legislative hearings today.
Thank you. And Chair Hardesty?
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum, Chair.
Okay, great. Okay, let's proceed then with public comment. Rhonda, if you'd like to open up the lines, we can proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name. Caller with the digit 606. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. Please slowly and state and spell your first and last name for the record. You may begin now.
My name is Amber Cannon, AMBERCANNON. Again, good morning. My name is Amber Cannon, and I am a member of Return Strong and have a loved one incarcerated in Nevada Department of Corrections. Director Daniels had made statements during the December 9th, 2020 Sentencing Commission that were not forthcoming and lacking important information. Director Daniels stated that he has an obligation to keep people confined until they are appropriately designated the right to go home, which is fair and true. Unfortunately, that has not been happening. We have been tracking the parole action reports every month in January. There were close to 150 people who had either expired their sentence and were not released, as in the case of Connie Arnold, who was kept past her expiration and contracted COVID. Or they were granted parole in the case of Robert Bowman. He was granted that right to go home and granted parole in the spring of 2020, but passed away from COVID in December 2020 while waiting to be released on a non-violent offense. He was serving a 1 to 3 year sentence for DUI, and the state allowed that to turn into a death sentence. I want to actually address the commission for a moment to say Nevada has an issue with sentencing. We are over-incarcerate and criminalize behavior that needs treatment, not prison, and that is something that needs to be fixed. There are others who have had their release dates pushed back due to lack of programming. These individuals are also at risk of succumbing to the torrent of COVID. The goal is to rehabilitate and release those who have proven that they are able to be successful members in the community. Instead, their family members are planning funerals. The director may not have control of the fact that there is a global pandemic, but he does have control of the truth and consequently the poor response of the state as a whole. We are begging for the accountability and communication and transparency from NDOC.
So we're gonna go to
Thank you.
826. Caller with the digits 826, please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may now begin.
Good morning. My name is Ayana, Ayanna Simmons, Simmons, and I am here to express my concerns over information given by NDOC at the December 9th Sentencing Commission meeting. During the question period, Dr. Latterman was asked about the elderly population at NDOC, and it seemed his question would have brought up the question of compassionate release. Nevada has a very high percentage of people incarcerated that fit into this definition of vulnerable inmates. In addition to the elderly, we also are concerned about people who are sitting in medical solitary confinement with terminal illnesses. NDOC has a policy for compassionate release according to the Conservative Justice Reform Project. However, data shows that populations that are elderly, defined as 55 and over, have an extremely low rate of recidivism, approximately 3.5% rather than 41% from the general population. In addition, they are twice as costly to incarcerate, and honestly, Nevada needs to look at their sentencing structure and how the impacts our aging prison population. That isn't the director's job, but it is the job of the commission. Nevada has a disproportionately elder population due specifically to the way we enhancement and habitual criminal laws. Many of our elderly inmates have been in prison for 20 and 30 years or more. While that isn't the director's fault, he and Dr. Minev are responsible for not addressing the option of compassionate release for terminally ill, disabled, and elderly inmates. They have the obligation to initiate the process, and it is not happening. Please review the information submitted in writing regarding 2 of our members, Terry Clark and Ryan O'Neill, who were recently highlighted in the article of the Nevada Current. It's time to stop talking and do something to fix this broken system. Before more lives are lost, we need to stop lying to ourselves. We are not doing well at handling this pandemic. We have a moral obligation. We're Nevada strong, battle born, and we're in a position that everyone that's a leader, that's in leadership, should have some compassion and concern about their fellow brother. And with that, I close. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 151. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may now begin.
Thank you. My name is Denise Bolanos, Genisebolanos. Good morning. My name is Denise Bolanos, as I mentioned, and I am a member of Return Strong. Thank you to the Commission for the opportunity to provide public comment. You see, without these public spaces, I don't believe that we would have any kind of voice on matters that are brought up at these meetings, matters that directly concern and affect us. Director Daniels mentioned at the previous Sentencing Commission meeting in December that groups such as ours have other avenues to be able to be heard by him, and that our voices matter and that they are heard. So far, that hasn't been the case, however, and that really is unfortunate, because the concerns of NDOC and the ones of the families of the incarcerated at the end of the day are one and the same. I want my husband to be healthy and safe and thriving in this environment for as long as he's there, as much as I'm sure Director Daniels wants his staff to be safe and healthy and thriving. One cannot exist without the other, and yet that can't happen in an environment where there is constant injustice and negligence and miscommunication. For example, we all lose when the department is short-staffed or understaffed in any facility, because it leads to our loved ones paying for that in the way of lockdowns that the officers need to implement as a result, and it makes the officers' jobs harder as well. We both lose in this example. Alternatively, we can also both benefit in certain situations. Incarcerated people being mentally, emotionally, and physically healthy and strengthening ties with families matters just as much as officers not having to work as long and as hard to fill in those gaps, so that they can have a better work-life balance and also able to nurture those family bonds. Every one of us benefits from a less stressful and hectic working and living environment within NDOC. Give families a chance to work with you through communication and collaboration, because when it comes down to it, our interests are one and the same. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 209. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may now begin. Caller with the last three digits, 209. Please state your first and last name and spell for the record. You have 2 minutes and may now begin.
Okay, my name is Ashley, A-S-H-L-E-Y. Last name is White, W-H-I-T-E. Good morning, my name is Ashley and I am a member of Return Strong and have a loved one incarcerated in DOC. I am here to respond to statements made by Director Daniels at the December 9th, 2020 Sentencing Commission meeting that conflict with my loved one's experience and what we have heard from incarcerated people across the state. Director Daniels has stated that each inmate has been issued 2 masks, but my fiance has only received 1 and has told me that some of the other inmates haven't received any. It is widely reported that they have never received new masks since the first ones were issued. In addition, most reports state that during the midst of the massive outbreak, COs were not wearing masks correctly and many were wearing gaiters. When incarcerated people would ask staff to mask up, they were often retaliated against or mocked and told that I'm going home tonight, I don't care if you get sick. He told about prison industries making hand sanitizer that isn't available to inmates because of the Urban League about people drinking it. There There may have been some, but there is a disciplinary process to process with that. That doesn't require implementing group discipline that puts the other 9,000 people at risk, especially when soap and hot water are a limited resource. This could have easily been solved by putting portable hand sanitizer stations on the tier and near the phones, but it was all or nothing. Also, it was stated that testing would be done weekly, but he hasn't been tested in over a month. They did give him N95 masks, but they were not fitted, and without proper fit, they are useless. We believe my fiance, who is high risk, has caught COVID twice. We can't confirm that because he was never tested. I am deeply concerned to hear that director stand in front of us and tell us a story that does not reflect the experiences of my loved one personally or the experiences of the hundreds of incarcerated people that have reached out to us throughout the pandemic. I remember one letter from a person at Warm Springs or Northern Nevada, and they said that they were so sick they were turning blue. Medical would not even come and give them relief medication. He believed he was dying that night. The letter told of how he wrote goodbye letters for his family and gave them to someone to mail, and then wrote to us. He made it, but however, is that the best we can do? Director Daniels, I am concerned that maybe you are deeply out of touch with what has happened inside the walls to people who are supposed to be.
Ms. White, your time has expired, but I would like to invite you to offer.
Caller with the last three digits 499. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may now begin.
Hello. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Hello, my name is Jody Hocking, JODIHOCKING. I'm the founder of Return Strong Families United for Justice for the Incarcerated, and I have a loved one at Southern Desert. I'm here to respond, as the others, to statements made by Director Daniels on the December 9th Sentencing Commission meeting. The director stated that they have implemented an all-hands-on-deck call to action during this health crisis. And while he gives the utmost respect to corrections officers who made the necessary sacrifices to work during the pandemic, it again only tells part of the story, kind of like a PR or public relations version, what the plan was and what was on paper and how it was going to be facilitated, but not the reality that occurred. I believe that really two things can be true at the same time, that was the plan and those were the things that were supposed to be implemented, but we also have to acknowledge and not pretend that that's not what happened. First of all, the staffing shortages at Warm Springs, High Desert, and NNCC resulted in serious issues with maintaining provisions for basic human needs like food. We received widespread complaints about the amount of food that was provided and that it didn't meet or even come close to meeting daily nutritional needs. We've had reports from facilities that have no way of communicating with each other that talked about receiving like 2 packets of peanut butter and 3 crackers and a carrot, or a bag lunch that contained 2 slices of bologna and a pack of mayonnaise. All hands on deck needed to have been prepared for the shortages in staff that would happen as people began to get sick. Instead, it had people who were positive, bouncing from facility to facility, working overtime, spreading COVID as they went. All hands on deck would have been prepared for the shortages in medical staff that would be required to humanely care for people if and when the virus hit. Unfortunately, that didn't happen either. They were pulling each other's teeth, giving each other CPR, checking for respirations, while COs and medical staff ignored calls for help and told them that the only way they were getting help was if they were dying. And even then, they might not get it because there was only one ventilator at Warm Springs. I won't say that there weren't COs that tried to help or did care, but unfortunately, the ones that didn't seem to be the overwhelming, consistent story. Director Daniels, we've been
Ms.
doing...
Hawkins, this is Justice Hardesty. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the time for your public comment has expired. We welcome
That's okay. I'll send it in writing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologize.
No, that's okay. I had some tech difficulties in the beginning. It's all right.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits 099. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may now begin.
Valerie O'Neill, VALERIEONEILL. Good morning. My name is Valerie, and my son is incarcerated at Southern Desert. I'm a member of Return Strong, and I'm here to respond to statements made by Director Daniels at the December 9th Sentencing Commission meeting and hope to actually understand where his information is coming from. I've been following the policy changes and watching the difference between what is said and what is done closely throughout the pandemic. My son is seriously ill and has an autoimmune disorder that makes him very susceptible to bad outcomes if he contracts COVID. As a matter of fact, we have been trying to apply for his compassionate release with no success or even response. He was just in the hospital a few weeks ago, which resulted in a $110,000 medical bill that we will owe since he's incarcerated. Since his return to prison, he still isn't getting the ordered medication and care, yet Director Daniels repeatedly states he treats each person as vulnerable. How is that possible when he doesn't treat the vulnerable as vulnerable? Director Daniels stated in the last meeting that the inmates were being tested once a week for COVID-19, but that is just not true. My son has not been tested one time during the pandemic, not at High Desert, not before he went to the hospital, not when he returned from the hospital, and not since he has been at Southern Desert. And he's very vulnerable. He isn't alone. We have many hundreds of letters stating that since the beginning of the pandemic, lockdown in March through the time of the meeting, that they were only tested once or twice, and at a maximum of 4 to 5 times. The director claims of weekly scheduled testing is untrue and reckless to make the public think that the department was testing inmates at regular intervals and assuring a safe atmosphere. Now, that there has been widespread outbreaks at the prisons, the goal is to work towards vaccination at the facilities, and the department needs to be transparent about the path forward in regard to that goal, and they have not been honest or transparent about the testing of inmates. Again, if they were your loved ones, wouldn't you be calling for full transparency and accountability? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Neill.
Yeah, got her. Is there anybody else for public comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Caller with the last 3 digits, 271. Please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. You may now begin.
My name is Tammy Irvine, TAMIIRVINE. I am also with Return Strong, and I am here to also respond to the statement made by Director Daniels at the December 9th Sentencing Commission meeting. It was concerning because he did not appear to be completely forthcoming. He stated that the NDOC was implemented when he calls a firewall strategy, which also includes limiting movement in and out of the prison, as well as limiting movement within the prison to reduce the number of outbreaks of COVID-19, under the guise of protecting the inmates as well as the staff. But the firewall strategy outline is being used in a manner that serves only to keep the inmates locked in their cells for days at a time for, quote, safety reasons. And it sounds great, but what happens during implementation has been different. At High Desert and Southern Desert, inmates who work in the prison industries go to work together. They can be up to 150 plus people working in close proximity. All workers unable to socially distance. Again, all walk to work together. They spend the day together and return back to the unit together. Yet, once they are in their units, they are sequestered in their cells and kept from showering and have restrictions on their phone, all while sending them to work. It seems the firewall strategy is less of an overall safety measure, more of a selective one based on what the department deems appropriate for the safety of their staff, while still making the profit and ignoring the humanity of the inmates. The director failed to mention any of this in his statement of the praise of how NGOC has implemented their self-serving strategy during this health crisis. If the strategy is in fact working and the facility is secure enough to have inmates working, then it is secure enough for basic human needs such as showering, phones, mail, and regular access to fresh air with staggered yard times for the inmates. We are going We are growing tired of the public relations reports and only want to get to the reality. If Daniels continues to give these reports, we ask that we be offered the opportunity to bring hundreds more letters of incarcerated people who have survived the pandemic from inside the DOC walls. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Irvine.
Are there any other callers for public comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. There are no more callers for public comment. Justice Hardesty?
Okay, I'd like to thank those who took the time to provide public comment. There is another period of time for public comment if you would like to participate in that period of time at the end of the meeting. You're most welcome to do so. I do want to comment on a couple of things. First, as the NDOC's efforts evolve in dealing with the pandemic, it is appropriate that the commission hear more about these issues and how they're being handled. But it is something that I would address and schedule at the next commission meeting to get an update from the department as to what is taking place. I also note that several comments we received today and previously, again, remind us about the compassionate release statute. And I want to mention to those who have called and expressed concerns about compassionate release, just about the statute itself. As this commission vetted last spring and early summer, when we were discussing with the Department of Corrections issues surrounding compassionate release and other concerns about the growing COVID-19 problem, it was clear that the statute is very, very narrow in terms of the director's authority to be able to deal with compassionate releases. If you have concerns about that topic, I would certainly urge those of you who are with various organizations that you consider communicating with the legislature those concerns, because it's only the legislature that can address the compassionate release statute, not Director Daniels. This commission did, in its communication with the governor and the pardons board and the legislature, inform its concerns about the narrow application of the compassionate release statute last year when we sent letters to the governor and to the legislature about this topic. With that, I'd like to open up agenda item number 3 and ask if the members of the commission have had an opportunity to review the minutes and see if there are any edits, comments, or corrections. Do any members of the commission have any edits, comments, or corrections regarding the minutes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes as drafted by our staff.
This is John McCormick, so moved.
McCormick has moved. Is there a second?
For the record, Christine Jones Brady, I second that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Jones Brady. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Logan.
I'll abstain from voting because I had left the meeting early last time.
Okay, sir. Thank you. We'll record your abstention. All those in favor, if you would, please raise your hand.
Go back to gallery.
Okay, are there any who are opposed? Seeing none, it is unanimous with the exception of Sheriff Logan's abstention. Let's turn now to agenda item number 4, a report from our executive director. As you know, she provides weekly updates to me regarding the activities of the department. We've become real pen pals. And I want to say again to her publicly how much I personally appreciate, and I know the commission appreciates, all the work and dedication that she has put into this effort. I hope some of you were able to watch the budget presentation by our executive director to the legislature. Her enthusiasm and her energy was apparent to the point where the chair remarked about how impressed he was. And I think we're just so fortunate to have this public servant assisting us in this important area. So thank you, Victoria. And if you proceed with your report, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that. And as this commission knows, I appreciate the opportunity to serve for this commission, and I'm very engaged in the work that we're doing. I put together a report, a handout for the commission to review. I was going to share my screen, but rather than delay on that, you have that within your reading materials. You can see this is a high-level summary of what we have been up to since we last saw you in December. As I have done in the past, I organize my report by the core functions which guide the activities and advance the mission of the department and the commission. As you can see, the various activities we all work on keeping our agency running. These are things that still need to be done to stand up the department and, of course, advance the mission and mandates of the commission and the department. For most, if not all of the activities, all members of staff are all involved. We all wear many hats. In our administrative core function, we currently have a vacancy. The administrative assistant 4 position is currently vacant and recruitment is in process. The job announcement was posted and we are waiting for HR to generate a list of our eligible candidates for us to interview. We hope to conduct interviews in the next week or 2. Under the administrative function, we are also on track with our furloughs and have made sure we take those each month. In the budget core function, we manage our budget and process our fiscal activities with the assistance of the director's office at the Department of Public Safety. We have some slight overages in our supplies category right now, but we have salary savings that we will use to cover those. I note that we only have salary savings because of the normal delays that arise between recruitment. We do not have these salary savings because we don't need the help. Another activity I wanted to mention in the budget function is in regards to the required training that we are completing for our procurement card or our purchasing card. The card will assist us in making purchases for the department. The training is for the program we will use to reconcile our bank statements. The statements require different levels of approval, which is why we are all completing the training. The last thing I have noted under the budget core function is that we have learned how to invoice CJI for the subaward that we were awarded, and we have even received our first check. Under the commission core function, you can see that we have been transcribing the minutes from the previous meeting, and as I have previously reported, we handle this within our department. We've also been busy preparing for this meeting. Last in this function, I will note that we currently have 2 vacancies on the commission. We have a legislative vacancy as Assemblyman John Hambrick is no longer in the legislature. I have emailed the director of LCB to request an appointment to fill this vacancy. We also have a vacancy that is typically held by a staff member of the ACLU. Last I heard from the governor's office, they are still processing the application and waiver that they've received for that appointment. Under the AB 236 core function, we have ongoing research and discussions related to the data that's required to be submitted to the department for the commission. We meet with CJI bi-weekly as they continue to assist in the implementation of AB 236. Most importantly in this core function is the progress we have made with establishing the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council. Laura Arnold, our staff attorney, has taken the lead on this, and she will provide a full update in agenda item 6. The activities in our reports core function have kept us very busy with drafting, revising, and submitting the AB 236 report. As you can see, we will discuss this more in agenda item 5. In the legislative core function, we were previously busy tracking interim committees. Now that we are in week 3 of the legislative session, we are busy tracking BDRs, bills, and committees. We will provide more detail about our legislative activities in agenda item 10. And finally, the outreach core function. I have been invited by the Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice to give a presentation at their March meeting. The substance of my presentation will be to introduce the department and the commission to the NACJ and inform them of the mandates and activities of the department and the commission. Since our last commission meeting, we have received a total of 30 communications from the public and from inmates. And the members of the commission can see the breakdown of those communications. Commission follow-up means we get letters or calls asking what happened at our last meeting. Unless there is a specific request, we often provide a copy of the agenda with our response so they can see what was discussed. As I've stated before, we respond to every single letter that is submitted to our office and respond and reply and call back every individual that reaches out to our office. When we respond to the letters, we ask them to clarify if they want their letters included as public comment at the next meeting of the Sentencing Commission. The individuals listed here in my handout have made such a request, and the letters they submitted will be included with the written public comment that we received. The commission also received these letters in advance of our meeting. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about my report.
I don't see any questions, Director, so I think we can move on to agenda item 5. As the commission is aware, the department submitted a statutorily required report on behalf of the commission, a draft of which was circulated to the commission members, in which we sought your input before finalizing it and sending it to the governor, the legislature, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Because of the timing of the collection of data and the date of the report, this agenda item will provide commission time to further respond to the data that was submitted and ask various questions. I also asked Victoria to give an overview of the report before we hear from agencies. Based on what we learned during the December meeting, this commission may need to provide guidance to the agencies and our own department, so we'll begin to address that as well. I do want to share with commission members, some of you had offered some comments for inclusion in the report, but those comments related to either questions that were asked or comments that a given commissioner had made, but did not reflect action by the commission. For that reason, I did not include those questions or comments in the final report because I didn't think that it was appropriate to convey individual commissioner questions or comments without the approval of the entire commission in conveying the report. That said, we have collected those and intend, frankly, to proceed to address those questions and inquiries and comments received from commissioners, including those that may come up in our meeting today, directly with the various departments as we work on further data collection and so forth. So I don't want you to think for a moment that because the final report may not have reflected a question or comment or suggestion that you had, it was out of disrespect. It was rather, I felt like the report should be the work product of the commission and its general report as to what information we had received consistent with the statute. I encourage commissioners to continue to provide questions and suggestions to the director, to me, if you wish, so that we can continue to convey that to the folks providing the data and working with the executive director and her staff to do so. So Ms. Gonzalez, if you would, let's have your introductory remarks about the report, and then we'll get into some specific presentations from department members.
Thank you, Chair. Before the agencies make their presentation, I will provide a summary of the report that was submitted on behalf of this commission, as the Chair just stated. The report has been included in your meeting materials and is available on our website. As you can see from the cover page, we titled the report the AB 236 Report, Findings and Recommendations from the Nevada Sentencing Commission. The report is organized based on the statutory requirements provided in NRS 176.01343. As has been discussed in previous meetings, the Commission is required to track and assess outcomes resulting from the enactment of AB 236, and then submit a report which includes its findings and recommendations. As AB 236 only went into effect July 1, 2020, it is premature to track and assess any outcomes. The two main purposes of the report are to first establish a baseline which will be used in the future to track and assess outcomes. Second, as this is the first collection of data, the report identifies those areas where data could not yet be collected and provides information about how agencies are addressing those measures that could not be reported. The agency submitted as much data as could be reported, and we included it in the report exactly how it was reported. Along about the collection of the data, some challenges the agencies faced, and goals for future submissions of data. Future reports will look very different from this report. In the future, the report will include findings and recommendations identified during commission meetings and highlight comparisons of the data using charts and graphs. The data submitted by each agency will be reproduced exactly as it was submitted in the exhibit section of the report. We shared this report with this commission to solicit feedback. Thank you to those of you that have submitted those feedback. And as the chair has indicated, we will address that moving forward as we continue to discuss next steps. Also, as the chair mentioned, the intent of today's opportunity to discuss the data that was submitted. As this commission did not have time to fully review the data as it was submitted and included in the report, we invited each agency to present the data that was submitted and answer any questions from the commission. Additionally, we may seek guidance from the commission on future submissions of data. The presentations from the agencies are generally outlined in the following manner. First, each agency will present the process for submitting the data. Then they will present challenges they face. For the third part of the presentation, I asked the agencies to identify questions that arose while collecting and reporting data. These questions may include how to interpret certain statutory language, how to report in a matter that complies with the requirements of the commission, and how to best meet the needs and goals of the commission. The last part of each presentation by each agency will conclude with time for the commission to ask questions. In terms of questions, the representatives from the agencies and our staff will be noting all of the questions. There might be some questions that cannot be answered today. Our intent is to answer all the questions in full at the May meeting of the commission. After the presentations are complete, I will recommend next steps to the commission regarding next steps for the data. With the permission of the chair, I would like now to turn the time over to the representatives from the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Of course, and for the commission's reference, this material for NDOC is at pages 3 through 24 of the commission's report. Director Daniels, are you and your folks ready to proceed?
Yes. Just prepared to proceed. I would like to turn their presentation over to Georgia Powers, who is our Chief of Offender Management. Ms. Powers, in our Northern office.
Hey, Ms. Powers.
There you go.
Chief Justice Victoria, thank you. It's a privilege to present today for you. My name is Harold Wickham. I am the Deputy Director of Programs for the agency, and I work with the Offender Management Division. So I will turn this over to Georgia and her team. They're a fantastic group of individuals that have worked incredibly hard to get this data for you and answer all of the questions that were posed. So I'm very pleased to present Georgia Powers and the Offender Management team.
My name is Georgia Powers. I'm the Chief of Offender Management for NDOC. We reported all of our data on the template that was provided by the commission. And I'm going to address some of the questions that came out of last meeting. The definition of terms, we had sentence length versus sentence stay. The sentence length is the amount of time the offender has been sentenced to serve by the court, and it does not change due to credits. The length of stay reflects the actual time served by an offender and includes credits added to sentences. There were questions regarding parole violators with no new offenses versus new offenses. And I will explain that offenders who violate parole, they're brought back to NDOC, and they do not have a judgment of conviction from a court. Their imprisonment status will be set to parole violator with no new offense. The imprisonment status could be updated later if a JOC is received for that offender. This logic is also applied similarly to the mandatory parole violators and probation violators. There were questions regarding offense groups. The offense category for any crime is specified on the judgment of conviction received from the court. It is defined by Nevada Revised Statute and the Nevada Offense Code. If an inmate has multiple convictions under the same booking number, the highest active offense for that booking was reported. The hierarchy for the highest active offense is as follows: sex, violence, property, drug, DUI, and other. This means that if an offender has a property or drug conviction, but also has a sex or violence conviction within the same booking, it will be reported for the highest. There was also a question about changing offense groups. That happens rarely, but it can happen. One example is we always categorized animal abuse as a violent conviction. There have been court rulings that have changed that, and we were asked by the Attorney General's office to categorize that as a property offense from now on. So again, rarely those things happen, but they may change. Okay, I'm gonna move on to scope of reporting. There were questions regarding how we reported the data for admissions and releases. That admission and release data that is on the report represents felony offenders under our jurisdiction who were admitted or released during the calendar year 2020. Total current population data represents felony offenders under our jurisdiction as of December 31, 2020. There was a question regarding fiscal year versus calendar year, and the reason we report that way is the JFA gets the data that way. There was a question about safekeepers. No safekeepers were reported in our data. The recidivism data in Section 2, Part C and D were based on a 2016 release cohort. That was the most current cohort for recidivism. All right. Reporting procedures. The NDOC had to create 3 additional reports to extract necessary variables to comply with the reporting requirements of AB 236. Reporting under AB 236 is a work in progress. The NDOC will continue to strive for accuracy and completeness in providing the data requested. At this time, I'm going to defer to Jenna Bonacorsi, our Statistician 2, about reporting challenges.
Hi, I'm Jenna Bonacorsi, Statistician 2 from OMD. And there were a few challenges that we faced with complying to the AB 236 reporting requirements. The first one being gender identity and sexual orientation. These are not values that we have previously reported, and this is due to HIPAA and data privacy restrictions. This data cannot be shared for those reasons as of now. In regards to recidivism, the 2016 cohort that we provided the data on, we previously did not report the type of admission, the gender identity, ethnicity, or their risk score. So that's why those values were not included for the recidivism section. The NDOC does collect data regarding an offender's race. However, we are currently in the process of updating our procedures so that we can incorporate more contemporary demographic methodology to comply with the national standards of race and ethnicity. So moving forward, those will be provided more accurately. We did have one section that was left up to interpretation, and we appreciate clarification on what exactly the commission is looking for in terms of prior felonies. There's a lot of different ways the NDOC can provide this information. We can give the highest offense group, their most recent prior felony, or even a specific offense group. Just whatever the commission is looking for, we can provide whichever option.
All right. And that is our presentation regarding the questions that were asked at the last meeting. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ladies, really appreciate your report and your follow-up on the questions that were generated. Let me open up questions to commission members to see if any commission members would like to pose some additional questions to you folks today. Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Justice Hardesty. And thank you all for the data you collected. I'm sure that that was a very difficult thing to do in short order. I do have a fair amount of questions about the data that I would like to just kind of go through them as they're listed in the AB 236 report. I don't know if you guys have that in front of you. If you don't, or if you need clarification about what I'm asking, just let me know, okay? So I wanted to start on page 4, which is prison admissions in its subcategory A, persons admitted. Or so I brought this up before. It's broken down into 6 types of crimes, and then the number of people admitted, of course, is relegated to whatever fits that category. My question is it possible for you all to break it down further? So for example, according to that data, 736 people were admitted out of the 4,362 for a drug offense. Is it possible that you can tell us what the drug offenses were, or perhaps maybe the top 10, and then break it down into how those numbers fit within those categories? Another example would be property crimes. I know that that's a vast amount of potential crimes. Can you break that down for us? For example, burglaries, and then, a theft offense. And so we can have a feel for where those people are falling in there. And I recognize it's probably a great deal of information, but I believe that it's far too surfacey right now, the way it is. So that's my first question.
Hi, it's Jenna Bonacorsi again. Yeah, that is definitely something we can work with our IT department to provide a more zoomed in on those 2 specific category types with drug and offense. And we, as off the top of my head, the best way to do that probably would be the 10 highest, and we could break it down like that and just give you a more detailed approach on the drug and property offenses. If those are the 2 offense types that the commission would like to see a more detailed view of, we can definitely work to provide that.
Great.
Mr. Hicks. Mr. Hicks, can I interrupt you if you don't mind? Ms. Bonacorsi, I think the question is a little bit broader actually than just those 2 line items. I share Mr. Hicks' question. Violence has a number of different areas, as does the other. So the question is, and I appreciate you were responding to a specific question, but it's a broader question to break this down even further. And I know you need commission guidance on this as to how we go about it and what crimes we're specifically seeking. So probably it's up to the commission to share with you some specific subparts of these. If you had that direction, is that something you could accomplish?
That's definitely data we record and have. I have to work with our IT department to make sure an efficient way to pull all of that and break down those different offense codes into this specific subcategories. Off the top of my head, yes, this seems like something that we could do and give instead of having those 6 in each of those 6 categories, really talking about what's included in there. But I don't, for right now, see any problems with being able to provide that. But again, I'd have to work with our IT department and make sure that how we would be able to break that down in an efficient manner.
So, Mr. Hicks, if you don't mind, I'd like to offer a suggestion to all of the commission members that you share with the executive director the crime types that you'd like to see as subcategories within these general categories. And let's see if we can arrive at a general consensus, and then we can get further development there. I'm sorry, Mr. Hicks, for interrupting you, but I wanted to try to get some to-dos attached to these worthwhile inquiries.
Please interrupt me. Thank you for the clarification, because that is what I was getting at. Is I really think it needs to be every category that's in that type of offense needs to be broken down. And for my 2 cents, I think it would be valuable to perhaps maybe it's the top 10 most common crimes, something like that, just to give, because if possible, all of it would be great. But if not, maybe we narrow it down to top 10.
Sure.
So now moving to page 5, there's another, it's the next category of data, and it's types of admission. And as an overall theme that I felt as I read the report is I think it's very important that we maybe have a definition section, because a lot of this is hard to understand what it means exactly. And so, for example, there's not physically received, 58 inmates. I don't know what that means. Or you did clarify parole violator with no new offense versus parole violator with new offense. But I do think, just as a general suggestion for the commission, that should be a definition section would be valuable. A question I have about that section is if someone, let's say we're booked into the Department of Corrections on a new offense, and naturally they would be accounted for in the offense type under the total number of people admitted. If they were paroled within that year and then violated and were sent back to prison, would that now count as another new admission for the same person? If that makes sense. If it doesn't, tell me.
Hi, yeah, so as far as the definition of the different types of admissions, that's definitely something we can provide. And for all of the admission types, giving a brief description of what that means could definitely be implemented. To your second part of the question, with if a person is admitted and released and readmitted, how we calculate that data is based off of a report that generates the specific imprisonment statuses and the movements attached with that, if they're coming in or coming out. So I'd have to take a deeper look at our data to confirm that with you. But as of right now, yes, I think they are getting counted for every admission and every release because it's the same. I'd have to talk again with our IT team if that is changed, if they come in on the same booking number or if they come in on a different booking number, or if that is something we could implement, and if they're coming in and out on the same conviction and booking number, I could see how maybe we would not want to include that information, or we do. That's again up to the interpretation of what admissions and releases are we looking for. Do we want just a new booking or a new admission, or people who are coming in? Because at the end of the day, that admission and release are gonna kind of cancel each other out. But in our data and our numbers, it's still gonna add to the same total at the end of the year, if that makes sense.
It does. So, the scenario I was thinking of, just to kind of give you a little bit more clarity on it, is if someone were booked into, let's say today, on a crime that exists as a property offense, and then was paroled this summer, and then violated again with no new crime, they just violated and were sent back, wouldn't that now account for another property offense in the total people admitted, but it would be the same inmate? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can think about it. I just want to point out those are.
No, it's a good point to think about. I would have to talk with my IT department deeper on that and how we are polling. Like you said, if somebody's admitted as a parole violator, what is that maybe something that we need to talk and look deeper into, and why they violated parole and how they're coming in, and if it's with a new offense or without a new offense, but off the top of my head, I don't have that answer right now. I would have to talk deeper with my IT department.
Yeah. And this is probably a question you're going to have to talk to your IT department about as well. But it was something I was going to make a suggestion to the entire commission today. And that is that category of data that's called type of admission that we've been talking about. In my estimation, that should be the baseline of persons admitted, and we should work from there, as opposed to offense type and being broken down amongst all the 4,362 inmates. Really, to me, it makes more sense to break it down by each type of admission. So we could see new commitments. What are those offenses? Parole, probation violators. What are those types of offenses? Because again, if we're trying to get data that is going to show us who's in our prisons and what got them there, we need to know, we need to be drilled down to that point. And so again, if you could look into it, and Justice Hardesty, if you want to interrupt me, please feel free. But as I read the report and throughout your data, to me, the type of admission should be the baseline, and we move from there versus the other way around. So next thing I just wanted to move to is the number of prior convictions. And I know you guys asked for clarity on what what qualifies as a prior conviction. But I'm curious, how did you tabulate this data? What did you use as your baseline for prior convictions?
So for the number of prior convictions, in one of our data softwares that store our data, OSM, we have a list when they come in there with all of their prior convictions throughout the country. They've been convicted of a felony, it shows up in there. And so for coming up with their total number of priors, was quite simple. It's just adding up the number of prior felonies that they have. The question we had with prior convictions comes down to when we are asked to report their prior convictions. I mean, some inmates have 10, 15, 20 prior convictions, and so in reporting that specific number of prior convictions, which prior, do you want the highest prior or not? But as far as the total number of priors, we have that from when they come in.
Does that come from NCIC or PSIs? Where does that data in your OSM system come from?
Georgia Powers, and that comes from the PSI. It is put into the computer by the program officer or intake caseworker upon admission.
Okay, thank you.
This is Alejandra Livingston, and I'd like to know if it's okay that I add something in regards to those questions.
Just
and
a
I am
moment.
with the Department of Corrections.
Excuse me, just a moment. We've got some interruption or talk over. Let's go back to who was just speaking. Who was the lady that was just speaking? We couldn't tell who that was.
Just hard to see. I wasn't done for the record. I accidentally hit mute, but I had a few more questions.
Scroll down and see. We need to figure out who that was, though.
Go ahead, Mr. Hicks, with your comments. I'm not sure what that interruption was, or if another commissioner was trying to comment. But please proceed with your other questions.
Thank you. So now I'm looking at page 7, which is risk score under all the admitted inmates for the last year. And my question is what is this risk score based on? Is there a risk assessment that's done when they come into custody, or is it a risk assessment that's done prior to sentencing? What is that risk assessment?
So I'll have to confirm with Sheila Cartwright. I don't know if she was able to make it on this call, but she's my main contact in our IT department. The risk score, for my understanding as of right now, again, I'd have to confirm with her. It comes from their NRAS score that they get when they get admitted, and we do that risk assessment on them. And that is the risk score as far as my current understanding of it. Again, I'd have to double check with our IT department on what exactly that score is, but to my understanding, that's where it comes from.
Okay. I found it interesting in the later part of the report, people with the low risk, it seemed by the data that people with a low risk score were serving more time than people with a medium risk or high risk. And so I'm not, again, this might be down to definition, but I'm not sure what that risk is actually, its purpose and its effect.
Mr. Hicks, this is Jennifer Lanterman. I just have a quick response to that because this relates to the NRAS tool and sort of what we understand about trends in recidivism. So typically, people who are the lowest risk are either people who have initial contact with the system, they don't have extensive criminogenic needs, right? Or there are people who've committed very serious crimes. So violent offenses, sex offenses, and they're considered low risk because that risk score reflects risk, the likelihood that they will reoffend. And so it sort of seems counterintuitive, but people who commit homicide are actually less likely to reoffend than, say, somebody who sells drugs or builds a meth lab in their house. And so that sort of, it leads to some confusing outcomes sometimes. So sometimes somebody has a relatively low risk score, but they might have a long sentence relative to the type of crime they committed.
That makes sense to me. Thank you, Dr. Landerman. I appreciate it. Last question, or last couple questions. If we move to page 10 and the parole and release from prison, that's subsection 2. I'm curious if you're able to collect and report data from those inmates that are in residential confinement, still considered in custody, but in residential confinement, if we could have a breakdown of that. And also those inmates who are in transitional housing, such as a restitution center, or I know we have one here in Northern Nevada. So we could have a breakdown too of inmates who are physically in our, lockdown in Department of Corrections versus those who might be in residential confinement or in those transitional housing where they're going out to work during the day and things of that matter.
Yes, people in transitional housing are already, Georgia Powers, are inmates at this moment, as our residential confinement, but they are under our auspices. So they are in all of that data. So the transitional housing people are inmates. They come back every night. They are in the data you have. And we can get you the residential confinement information broken out also.
Thank you. Since I have the floor, Justice Hartsey, I just want to make sure I didn't have any other questions.
Time.
No, I have no further questions. I'll add my suggestions at the end of this agenda item. Thank you.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. Dr. Landerman, would you like to pose any questions or offer any comments to this group?
Yes, Justice Hardesty, thank you. This is Jennifer Lanchman for the record. So I have questions for parole and probation based on the data reported by Department of Corrections. So page 5 of the report indicates that approximately 45.3% of the 2020 Department of Corrections admissions consists of revocations of discretionary mandatory parole and probation for technical violations only. This is high, and it's a challenge given the AB 236 goals of reducing Department of Corrections population, improving the effectiveness of community supervision, and reducing barriers to successful reentry. So this scenario raises a few questions for me about graduated sanctions. I know that generally there have been discussions over the last few years about expanding graduated sanctions, and I know that day reporting centers have opened. But I have 3 specific questions related to this scenario. First, what graduated sanctions are available to parole and probation officers who are working with clients who are committing technical violations? Second, are you able to produce data on the number of clients who have been revoked for technical violations only, who were referred to graduated sanctions before that revocation? So can you produce data that distinguishes between clients who had a technical violation and you proceeded right to revocation versus clients who had technical violations, you referred to graduated sanctions, and based on continued violations were then subsequently revoked? And third, are there problems with implementing the graduated sanctions that are available? And if there are you able to articulate the general nature of those problems so that we can understand the landscape in which you are working with clients who might be non-compliant with their supervision conditions?
Dr. Lanneman, I don't want to get picky here, but I think all of those questions relate to the presentation by the Division of Parole and Probation, and we're not there yet.
Well, they relate to parole and probation, but they are based on the data reported by Department of Corrections. So I think sort of maybe wherever you want it to go can go, but I think it raises a significant issue that we need to address.
Well, let's pose the question to the division, to the NDOC. Are you able to provide data that answers the questions posed by Dr. Lanterman? And to the extent you aren't able to, we will defer the questions to P&P.
Hello, this is Alejandra Livingston, and I am an economist with Nevada Department of Corrections. It's this. That's not it. Sorry about that. This is Alejandra Livingston with Nevada Department of Corrections. I believe that if I understand the question is in regards to whether the Nevada Department of Corrections can provide more detailed information on technical parole violations and graduated sanctions. And I wanted to clarify that, yes, the Nevada Department of Corrections is tracking graduated sanctions, events, and parole violations. We're actually tracking the 30-day revocations and the 90-day revocations as per AB 236. And this data is also being provided to JFA. So JFA is also analyzing that data, but what they've noted as far as the calendar year 2020 is that although we received significantly lower numbers of new commitments in 2020, new commitments for males went down by 23%, but technical parole violations went down by only 9%. Part of that had to do with quash warrants as well. But there may be other factors as well, so we can try to investigate that. And of course, parole and probation may have additional data that they could provide.
Any other questions, Dr. Lanterman, at this time?
No, Justice Hardesty. Thank you.
Okay, do any other commission members have any questions for the NDOC staff?
Justice Hardesty, this is Tom Lawson. I have one question for him, and I kind of am leery about popping up on screen after that last blast of questions from the doctor, but I do have some notes on answering some of those when it is after our presentation. Just to follow up on Mr. Hicks's question about the risk score, and my question related to that was, which NRAS tool are you using? Are you using prison intake to establish that risk tool, or are you using the pre-release tool?
For me to answer? Okay. Hello, this is Alejandra Livingston. The NRAS tool that's being utilized is the intake one because the law requests for that, the intake, that we use that one, the initial one.
Okay.
And that one is probably, excuse me, more applicable for the admission side of the data that we're providing. Perhaps if it's necessary, we can try to provide the NRAS score that's done towards the end of the person's time in prison, because that would be probably more related to how the inmate is likely to behave after being released. So if it's desired, we need to know and we can try to provide that.
That heading is, topic A for that is admissions. So I was expecting the prison intake, but I wanted to just verify that. So thank you.
Before you, Mr. Lawson, does that cover your questions? I wanted to follow up if I may.
It does. Thank you, sir.
Could I follow up? I infer from the response, Ms. Livingston, that you're able, or you are conducting pre-release risk assessments for the inmates. I assume that's a routine process, but I don't want to assume anything. Could you describe the process and tell us if that data is available? I do think that would be very helpful to have.
This is Georgia Powers. We do the intake tool when they come in, and then there is not a pre-release one done before they leave. If they stay in prison a certain amount of time, we will give them another assessment, but there is not one done upon pre-release.
Okay. Well, perhaps we'll be able to pose that question to the parole board. But you don't do a pre-release assessment as part of a plan or a pardon application, not pardon, but a parole application.
We do one if one is needed before parole board. However, we do not want to do one prior to release. But okay. I believe PNP is doing one when they go on to parole.
Okay, we'll check with Mr. Lawson about that when we get to him. Are there any
if
other?
You'd like, sir, I can cover that right now, just so we don't lose sight of that.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Under the system of tools, under the Nevada Risk Assessment System, the intake tool is just what it sounds like. It's to be done for classification purposes when the inmate enters the facility. The pre-release tool is just that. Prior to the board making a release determination, the tool is intended to be used by or on an incarcerated individual to measure their suitability for release to community supervision. The community supervision tool that we use under the standards is not done until 90 days after release to see how they're adapting to that. And so use of the community supervision tool before release is contraindicated because that's not what it's designed for. And we do not do that. There are times when we may end up doing that just depending on intake and our workflow, maybe not do that all the way at 90 days. Maybe it's done a little earlier than 90 days. But the one that sets up their qualification when they first come out, the intent of the system is for that to be the prison release tool, not the community supervision tool.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Are there any other commission members that have questions at this time of the NDOC staff? All right, seeing none, on behalf of the commission, I'd like to thank the staff of NDOC that presented regarding these questions and these issues. I also want to thank you very much, Director, you and your entire team, for the cooperation you've extended to the Sentencing Commission staff in coordinating these. I know that these are very challenging asks with the IT systems that we work with, and really grateful for the dedication and the work of your personnel to help answer some of these questions.
Thank you, Justice Hardesty. This is Deputy Director Williams. Deputy Director Daniels had to step out real quick, but he will return. But thank you for your kind words, and we will continue to work with all questions that were answered, asked of us to provide answers.
That's great. Thank you, Director Williams. Good to see you. Let's move on then to the Division of Parole and Probation. And that would be information that is found at pages 24 through 33 of the report for commissioners who are wanting to ask questions specifically about the content of the report. Chief Lawson.
Hello again. I have with me online Lieutenant Ryan Osborne. He is our Deputy Commander of the General Services Bureau, and they do the tracking of it. And first and foremost, we've had comments about this in testimony when we talked about AB 236 last session. We did submit a substantial fiscal note to AB 236 regarding the data collection elements, and those positions, we had positions that were initially funded for data collection for this report, and then ultimately due to the COVID impact, the money for those positions was reverted prior to us being able to hire them to offset our share of the shortfall of the general fund. And so collection of the data has been very difficult. Lieutenant Osborne will touch into that on our behalf, but I guess the last part of it is our data system currently, as we've talked about a number of times, is just inadequate and in process of being redesigned with an outside vendor. So we have high hopes for better data in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Osborne.
Thank you, Chief Lawson. Good morning, Commission. I'm Lieutenant Ryan Osborne with the Nevada Division of Parole and Probation. I'm here to provide you some insight into the operations of the Division of Parole and Probation with regards to AB 236. I hope to give you an idea of where we were, where we are, and where we're headed. After the passing of AB 236, the Division of Parole and Probation identified that our current system, Otis, would not be able to provide the data required by AB 236. At that time, the division identified the need for the creation of 3 new personnel at the division headquarters office to manually tabulate and aggregate all the necessary AB 236 data. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, the Division of Parole and Probation was asked to surrender all of those positions. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in that position right now. That's why the data looks like what it looks like. The good news is that the AB 236 positions are funded for the next biennium in the governor's recommended budget. We did, although faced with this obstacle, undeterred, the division set about the task of reporting as much data as it could in the AB 236 report to the best of our ability given these limited resources. The data collection was accomplished by manually tabulating and aggregating using existing staff the limited relevant data that existed within our current system and repurposing existing reports that existed on our current Crystal reporting database. Giving you an idea of where we're headed, currently the Division of Parole and Probation has under contract a new vendor for the purposes of creating an offender management system. The division is working diligently to ensure all AB 236 requirements for reported data are represented within the reports and outputs of the new vendor system. To date, the division does not have an effective go live date for its new system, but is working daily towards that goal. All AB 236 reporting elements were included in the request for proposal form, word for word, directly off of the statute to our new vendor. The new system will be 100% capable and compliant with AB 236 reporting requirements as written today. and we're prepared for questions.
Are there any questions for Lieutenant Osborne or the chief? Yes, Dr. Lannerman.
Hi, this is Dr. Lannerman for the record. So I'd just like to follow up with Chief Lawson, just to get an idea of what is going on with the availability, use of challenges associated with graduated sanctions in relation to the earlier questions I asked about revocations for technical violations only, so we can sort of get a better sense of what the landscape is with resources for parole and probation.
Sure. So I guess first and foremost, your question about the number shown in the NDOC data portion of it. Prior to the implementation, I think the biggest data concern there was that we had different definitions of a technical violation. We, meaning parole and probation, included domestic violence and other non-felonies as a new offense and not a technical violation, and other entities did not. So by having that common definition, I think we'll see clarity in the data moving forward, and that number will adjust appropriately. So in theory, if we had additional violations or classifications of offenses that we considered a new violation, then their technical violation numbers were greater than ours because we considered some of those to be new offenses and they did not. So now that we have that commonality and definition by statute, that'll reconcile some of those numbers. And I'd say that the previous data points, may not be as reliable, for analysis. The second part is, I believe, relative to your question about could we break down some of those elements to a more granular level? Absolutely not in our current system. That would require a hand reading or hand mucking of all the chronological notations, just the free text fields in order to do that. And if you're familiar with database design, that is the absolutely most inefficient way to cull data is free text. So the new system is going to have free text fields, but we want all those other elements, as many things as we possibly can, to be collected via pick lists, checkboxes, code tables that is, sortable and able to be analyzed. Gosh, I think that's the only two of your questions that I remembered off the top of my head. So if you wouldn't mind repeating the other two, I'd appreciate it.
Yes. So the two other questions relate to what graduated sanctions are currently available to PNP officers for use for non-compliant clients. And second, are there problems implementing the existing graduated sanctions? And if there are, can you just briefly explain what those types of challenges are?
Sure. I guess first and foremost, I do want to point out that we had graduated sanctions before AB 236 made them cool. We started graduated sanctions back in 17. Really the changes to AB 236, the impact to our graduated sanctions was we inserted temporary revocations into our existing matrix, and we continue play as we had been doing. So the matrix has been effective, of course, with the loss of the DRC, the money being reverted, and then it hasn't been funded moving forward. That was a shot to our technical, our tools in our toolbox relative to graduated sanctions. The same thing with state-funded house arrest money, where before we had the option of placing somebody on house arrest at state cost. Again, that money was reverted due to the pandemic and has not been refunded moving forward. So that was two large blows to our tool belt. But the other elements are still there. I mean, anything from the very low level of curfew and additional reporting and things like that, additional drug testing, up to recommendations for temporary revocations. That matrix is in place and is in use. On the parole side, I think I just heard anecdotally that we had our first person come across for a third temporary revocation on the parole side. And I guess tabulating data for the parole side is much easier because we have a North representative and a South representative, and much smaller agendas, so that when we send those over to hearing and come back, we are internally hand counting those, because again, our system technical violations didn't exist back in 1999 when or temporary revocations and those kind of graduated sanctions didn't exist back then when the system was created. So we're hand counting all of our parole temporary revocations, so we have data points. Parole ones. The probation ones, that's darn near impossible to do a hand count on, with the number of district courts and the number of departments within those district courts, and of course Clark and Washoe counties. So they're in the system for future reference, but again, they're being collected at the offender level via a narrative in their notes, so we can't tabulate those. But we do have good numbers on temporary revocations on the parole side, and that process has been working very well. When they go over, we're getting the data back on them, and again, the board has been very good in analyzing those and applying appropriate, sanctions, relative to the evidence of the crime. And we have had several that are second time and even a third timer on the temporary revocation side. We have noted on anecdotally that on the probation side that a couple of judges have imposed a far greater sanction for a temporary revocation than the standards were for a first offense. But those have just been one-offs. And again, we don't have total numbers of those sanctions imposed.
Any other questions for Chief Lawson or Lieutenant Osborne?
This is Kimberly Mull. I have a couple questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lawson, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you say that when someone has a new offense of domestic violence, that it is a technical violation and not a new offense? Is that what you said?
No, I said historically there were differences in opinion of what constituted technical violation, and that the data previously reported, i.e. the data in this report, half of that data was collected under that difference of opinion of what constituted technical violation, and half of it would have been after AB 236 was active, and there was a common definition of that. And so, but part of that difference was what constituted that, what offenses were there. The division's point of view was that a domestic violence was not a technical violation at any time. And because of the violent nature of that, we classified that as a new offense prior to implementation of AB 236.
Okay, and so now what is it classified as?
I have to bring up the specific language to talk about those, but that was actually an amendment we offered, was to have certain non-felonies included in that definition of a new offense and not be considered a technical violation because of those concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mull. Any other comments or questions from commission members for the chief or Lieutenant Osborne?
Chair Hardesty, this is Chris DeRico.
Hi, Chris.
Sorry about, I'm having difficulties with my microphone through Zoom, so I had to go backup plan through phone here. I would like to comment on Ms. Mull's question that domestic battery under AB 236 is not considered a technical violation. So I did want to add that. And then I did have one question with regard to the report on page 5. It was actually a question for NDOC when you might deem that appropriate. I know they already spoke, but I was having difficulties and nobody could hear me.
Oh, no problem. We can circle back to Director Williams and his team. And if they're not available, we can ask them to supplement with a later response. So what is the question, Chairman?
So my question is on page 5 of the report, and this is something that I had brought up with Ms. Gonzalez approximately a month ago, and where it has the types of admissions, and we have the mandatory parole violators with no new conviction and also with a new offense. Those numbers are 128 versus 3. Additionally, you have down below the parole violators with no new offense, 833, and parole violator with new offense, 13. I'm assuming that this is the case, that those numbers are generated for the type of admission once they actually hit the gate of the prison. And if there are alleged violations, which I can tell you are most time for new crimes, a very high number for new crimes, if they have not been adjudicated on those new crimes, is that why they are just showing as a violator with no new conviction? And if that is the case, after a parole violation hearing, and if it has been determined that there was a new conviction, do those numbers change, or should they change after the fact to notate that in fact there was a new conviction, it just wasn't there at the time they initially hit the gate?
Great question. Director Williams, is your team available to comment on that?
Yeah, Deputy Director Williams, for the record, Georgia Powers will answer that question.
Thank you, Deputy Director. This is Georgia Powers. Yeah, Chairman Dorico, it is pulled on it's whatever their imprisonment status is, the data is pulled. So if they left and came back, and on that date, they are now a parole violator, that is what it will pull. If they haven't gotten a new judgment of conviction, it will pull with no new. If we pull the data again on a different date and they have been sentenced, then they would be with new charges. So it is whatever date the data is pulled.
So this is Chris Dorico for the record. So I think those numbers there, in my opinion, certainly they come back as alleged violators. And once again, I can say predominantly most of those alleged violators are for new convictions or for even being absconders. And I understand at least the NDOC has to calculate it as what they are at the time that they hit the gate. But it would be kind of nice to have information, I think, down the road that, okay, how many of those violators, after they actually had that formal parole hearing, were found to have new convictions, because I could see that those numbers would completely flip-flop.
Georgia Powers, I believe I understand what you're saying, but the imprisonment status will change. Whatever it is, the date we pull the data. So it will show their updated status.
Okay. And I think what's holding me up here is because it says type of admission. They're only going to be admitted one time. So they're going to have it admitted, and predominantly, according to these statistics, that means that probably 98% of them show as they had no new convictions, which was the case at the time. But formally, after a violation hearing, I would venture to say that it's probably 70% instead of 5%. And I don't know, maybe that's something we could capture in a whole nother category. Maybe it's not right for the admissions category, but maybe it'd be something to capture after a formal violation hearing.
Okay. Georgia Powers. So I will, I'm making notes on this, and we can discuss this and look and see if there's another place that we might be able to report that. Our sentence management department is updating those after the revocation hearings. So maybe we can look at the data and have a further discussion about this.
Last question then. So is that a part of this report? If that's being updated right now, I guess that's not a part of this report. I don't recall seeing that. And if so, that would be great to have that, because then it would show what they were on admission. And then ultimately, down the road, yes, fact they were convicted. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Justice Hardesty. Ms. Powers, I would like to follow up on the inquiry because I think it's an excellent point. Maybe it's just another data set. You're not going to like this, but another data set within the report, because it seems to me, and I would urge others on the commission to weigh in on this suggestion. I could see that category of probation violator, or even parole violator with no new offense, ultimately still being reflected as no new offense because there's been a plea bargain to dismiss the new offense in light of the fact that they've been returned to prison. Is that capable of being captured, Ms. Powers? In other words, there may be a judgment of conviction, but there may not be because the DA's office is just satisfied they've gone back to prison to complete their term.
Yeah, Georgia Powers. If there was a plea deal, if it did not result in a felony, no, that is not something that we would capture.
Okay.
We're not going to know if charges were dropped. I mean, we would know, but it's not going to be something that we capture.
Okay, I think we want to think about that because I think that could be a valuable piece of information. So maybe you and our team could communicate further about that, and maybe there's other ways we can address that. Chairman, to you, does the parole board maintain that kind of information on the folks that they conduct hearings on? And is there a point at which you eventually find out whether the new offense goes to conviction or the new offense is pled out?
Costa Rica for the record. So after, I'll step it through. Once a parole retake warrant's been issued and they're ultimately brought back into NDOC custody, if they have charges pending, those hearings are continued out until resolution of that case. Once a resolution of the case happens, then we're able to move forward. And at that point in time, we know whether or not a new conviction has occurred. Now, you could look at it. There would be some information that possibly NDOC would know. If it's a new felony conviction, certainly at some point in time, they're going to get a new judgment of conviction if that individual was sentenced to prison for that new offense. They wouldn't get it probably if it was they had a new felony conviction that was mandatory probation, for instance. We know when they've been convicted of a new offense. And the other thing I would mention, if it was a gross misdemeanor offense or a misdemeanor domestic battery or stalking, one of the other offenses like those, we know about it. We put it on our certification of order. That copy is sent to the NDOC, Parole and Probation as well. So we, on our documents, we're able to note it, but certainly they're not going to get, or NDOC is not going to get anything on it formally unless there is a new judgment that hits their facilities.
But to your earlier comment, if you defer action on the revocation until the new offense is resolved, I assume you still revoke in instances in which the new offense is dropped rather than completed to a judgment of conviction.
Costa Rica for the record. So yeah, if a new offense, let's say, is dropped, we can move forward, and that might then make that, then yes, absolutely, we would move forward, but it might turn that case into those alleged violations now into technical violations, which would qualify for temporary revocations. And that happens in many instances. It's certainly to the inmate's benefit to go through the process with the new charges because that happens in many cases. So we can move forward once a resolution of those new charges have taken place, being dismissed, pled down, a new conviction. whatever it may be. But once those are no longer there, yeah, we absolutely move forward, and many of those do turn into technical violations, which require only a temporary revocation.
So does your department maintain records of those dispositions? Do you maintain a record of someone that you've revoked, but it was revoked based on a plea deal as opposed to a resolution of the new offense by judgment of conviction?
Rico, for the record, not records of that nature. What we have records of that we're able to determine is whether or not we revoked an individual under AB 236 as technical violations and the period of time that they qualified for that temporary revocation, or if they're required for a full revocation or up to the statutory maximum. We do maintain those statistics as well, and those are all forwarded as well onto NDOC as well, and as a part of JFA.
So I'd like to have the director continue this conversation with you folks offline. I don't know if there are other commission members that are interested in this, but I am, and I think it's something that we need to have a little more detail about.
This is Tom Lawson. To chime in on that is that just so everybody knows is we do not track that either. Wouldn't have a way of knowing whether, unless we were to either review court transcripts or sit in court ourselves to know whether a charge was dismissed because it was lacking evidence or dismissed as part of a plea bargain. A dismissal is a dismissal, and I would just be concerned with continuing down a path of in using a charge for which there was no prosecution and the charges were dismissed against an offender moving forward in terms of graduated sanctions. I think that would open us up to challenges that we're being arbitrary and capricious, and would be a concern for us.
I appreciate the point, Chief, and I don't disagree with your observation. I'm also concerned, though, that on a report that shows 1,000 probation violators with no new offense is a misstatement of the facts. And it seems to me that some of those, maybe a high percentage, ultimately have a judgment of conviction, and some of those are revoked after having had the new offense dismissed. That's not for the purpose of holding it against anybody. It's for the purpose of us understanding what this statistic is telling us. And I don't want the public or the legislature or anybody to be misled into thinking that we're violating people who have no new offenses. And I think that's the chairman's point. But I think that revocations occur, at least from what I've seen, both through a judgment of conviction ultimately for the new offense, but also as a result of a plea agreement where the defendant is going to be revoked and there's no need to continue with the prosecution of the new offense. At least that was my experience as a district court judge, and I think that is still the case. But I think we have maybe belabored the point, so let's see if there are any other questions for the chief and Lieutenant Osborne beyond those we just discussed. Okay, then seeing none, I'd like to turn over the time to representatives of the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division. Their information is contained on pages 34 through 47 of the report. And so let's proceed with that.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Anya Hickox, and I'm a manager with the Records, Communication, and Compliance Division. I will provide you with a presentation, hopefully. Just bear with me for a second. Nope. Just 1 second. Here we go. You should be able to see now the presentation in front of you titled Data Provided to the Sentencing Commission by RCCD as required by AB 236.
Ms. Cox, we do see that.
Thank you. I'd like to start with an introduction. Records Communication and Compliance Division hosts the central repository that collects and compiles criminal records data for the state of Nevada. We have contributing law enforcement agencies and criminal justice agencies who are mandated and responsible for submitting the statistical data to us. It's the data related to the crimes that took place in their respective jurisdictions. UCR programs, the Uniform Crime Reporting Program, collects, analyzes, compiles all data provided, and historically publishes it in an annual Crime in Nevada report that is provided to the public. The UCR program is providing part of this data to the Sentencing Commission as prescribed by the AB 236. According to the AB 236 and NRS 176.01343 section 1D, that NRS requires the commission to track and assess trends observed from data collected and reported to the commission by RCCD regarding two measurements. One is the uniform crime rates for Nevada and each of Nevada's counties by index crimes and type of crime. And the second is the percentage changes in uniform crime rates for Nevada and each of Nevada's counties over time by index crimes and type of crime. So how does this reporting process look like? In the past, prior to January 2020, the agencies that submit crime data to Uniform Crime Reporting Program would submit that data in various ways, but mostly by faxes and emails. Then those faxes received had to be entered manually by the UCR staff into an Excel spreadsheet. That in time morphed into an Excel spreadsheet that was provided by the FBI, which helped in the agencies in this process of submitting data and make it easier for them to transmit it to us. As of January 2020, the data is submitted electronically to a centralized repository that is operated by the UCR program. And UCR program staff compiles those submissions into monthly submissions to the FBI. As of January 2021, this electronic reporting is still ongoing. However, the format changed from the summary reporting system, for short known as SRS, to an incident-based reporting system called NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting System. One would ask, what is the difference between the two systems, NIBRS and the SRS? Following table or following slide compares both systems. In short, NIBRS, as the name suggests, is an incident-focused reporting system, which means that all the offenses within the incident are included, are reported, where SRS was only an offense-based system. And that ties us into the hierarchy rule, which SRS was based on. Hierarchy rule means that only the most severe offense was reported per each incident. And other viewed as lesser crimes, even though sometimes still very severe, were not reported. NIBRS does not operate on based on hierarchy rule, and therefore all the offenses in within the incident are reported, up to 10 offenses. Also, NIBRS includes crimes against society that were not included in the SRS system. And very importantly, NIBRS includes much more detailed information about the crime occurring. There are 46 location types, for example, versus 8 in the past system. And very importantly, victim data and offender data is included for all offenses. And that was not the case with the previous system, where only victim and offender data was recorded for murders. So what is the impact of the mandate to report data to the Sentencing Commission on our agencies, reporting agencies, and RCCD? From the standpoint of the reporting agencies, there is no impact when it comes to providing data. All information that is required is already reported and submitted in agencies' monthly submissions. From the UCR program perspective, there is a slight impact as some additional statistical data will have to be compiled. So what is that additional data that needs to be compiled? As far as the first measurement that we need to report to the commission, the uniform crime rates for Nevada and each of Nevada's counties by index crimes and type of crime. The additional data would have to be calculated for each county. Right now, historically in our annual publication, we would present that data for Nevada as a state. So we would have to also include data for each county, which right now with our capacity with using central repository database, that is very possible for us to obtain and report. The second measurement, the percentage changes in uniform crime rates for Nevada, for this state and for each of Nevada's counties over time by index crime and type of crime, is the same situation as the previous measure. We do report historically that data yearly, annually for the whole state. So we would have to compile data for each county, and that is just as the previous one is within our capacity. Here's an overview of the agencies that are contributing with their data to the UCR program. We are working in partnership with 46 agencies. There are a couple of agencies that will start reporting crime statistics to the UCR soon. But those two slides present the agencies that are currently submitting crime statistics to UCR program. I also wanted to mention definitions that we use when we report statistics to the commission. For uniform crime reporting purposes, an index crime is defined by the total number of violent and property crimes. This slide shows information regarding violent crime and definitions that are provided by the FBI. And briefly, the violent crime is composed of 4 offenses: murder and non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Those violent crimes are defined as those offenses which involve force or threat of force. And then below is definition for each of the individual violent crime. Oops. There we go. And now when it comes to the property crimes include offenses of burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson. The object for those type of offenses is taking of the money or property, but there's no force or threat of force present for the victims. And again, this slide shows more detailed definitions for each crime and what they constitute according to the definitions provided by the FBI to the UCR program. Now the measurements that we're using in presenting information to the commission. The first measure is crime rate, which is the number of offenses per 1,000 inhabitants. This can be calculated for any city, town, county, as long as we know the population of the required area. And this slide presents how to compute a crime rate. So it is simply by dividing the number of offenses by population per 1,000 inhabitants. And our second measurement is a percentage change. This is a difference between occurrences that took place in 2 different years or other periods as desired, divided by the number of occurrences from prior year or period, multiplied by 100 to show a percentage change. This number also can be computed for the local agencies in order to present crime trends for a given offense in a particular time frame. This measure can show increase or decrease over time. This slide shows data provided by our CCD to the Sentencing Commission. For this data is for the state of Nevada. It is representing the following measurements. The number of offenses that took place in 2019, crime rate in 2019, number of offenses for the year prior, when in this case it was 2018, and a percentage change from the year prior. This data, as you can see, is shown by index crimes that's divided by violent crimes and property crimes, which in turn are divided into more detailed crimes that I mentioned and showed the definitions in the previous slides. We also provided data for each county separately as requested. This slide represents the sample data for Clark County. On this slide, there's additional information for each county as contributing agencies are included, and you can see which agencies contributed to this, this data provided, as some data for some of the agencies might be missing in certain years. To summarize the information presented so far, the statute requirements can be met with our system capabilities. And our data that was received in many forms in the past and compiled for the annual report now is readily available in our repository that is also available to the public. And you can see the link on that slide to our website where you can access the data that I just mentioned. This slide shows the landing page for the website. I mentioned in the previous slide, this shows a selection dropdown. The first dropdown is the selection of the jurisdiction. The data can be selected for the state as a whole or for particular agencies. The second selection is the year. We have data available in the system as far as or old as 2014 in some cases. And the third selection is the theme. And the themes consist of 4 different themes, which are properties crime, domestic and elderly crimes, violent crime, and hate crime. This slide shows data for the violent crimes. So if we made a selection for the violent crimes and certain year, I believe this data shows 2019, or this slide shows 2019 data. This is what we would be presented with. It shows graphs and measurements for selected, in this case, violent crime. And then another example, there is also information, more detailed information, in this case, part of the violent crime murder data. Also, each of these graphs has a link to a lookup table, and lookup tables look or show on as shown on in this slide, where the data is detailed, and then it can also be exported into an Excel spreadsheet and further analyzed if desired. Now, when it comes to limitations, the transition from one way of reporting data, which was summary, to the neighbors, changes our source of data for the better, because there's more information and more details, and the hierarchy rule is no longer present. However, it poses some challenges because the data between it may not be comparable. So the summary data and neighbors data may not be one-to-one comparable, because neighbors incorporates much more information than the previous system. Since the transition has been very recent and still ongoing for some of the agencies, we have not had the opportunity to test our capabilities to pull some of the data from the neighbors database. So that's something that would have to be done down the road, and if any limitations are present, reported at that time. The transition from summary to neighbors may potentially increase the number of certain crimes, especially the ones that were less severe and were not reported according to the hierarchy rule. So some of the trends may require adjustments and may not be comparable, as I mentioned, one-to-one. We also have 2 questions for the commission, more in lines with some clarification on the data that commission would like to have presented with. So the first question is, we were mandated to provide data regarding crime rate over time. And our question is, what is the time frame for the crime rate the commission would be interested in? I would want to add that right now we showed a yearly change, but if that's something that, a 5-year, excuse me, yes, 5-year span. But if there's something, some other time frame that the commission would be interested in, we would be gladly to oblige if that would be the way the commission would like to go. The other question is, the NRS also mentions percentage change in crime rates, but does not specify exactly over what time. So would the commission be interested in the percentage change in crime rates from the previous year to the current year, or is there any a different time frame that would interest the commission to see? And this is the last slide with the references. And we arrived at the questions. We'd be happy to answer any questions that any members of the commission may have. Also, if there are any questions after this presentation, there's an email address provided for the UCR team that we can definitely provide any information at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hickox. Commission members, are there any questions for Ms. Hickox? All right, seeing none, Ms. Hickox, thank you for the thorough presentation. And with respect to the questions that you posed, we'll put this on the May agenda to discuss among the commission members and see if we can get you a response. I really appreciate your being available and providing this response.
Thank you.
Commission, we've been going at it here a little bit. Before we take a break, let me just wrap up this agenda item. I'll just complete this by asking the staff to work with the members of the agencies to clarify some additional questions that were raised. I want to invite all of the members of the commission. I know that this is a big topic. There's been a lot of things that have surfaced and things will come to mind, no doubt. When they do, urge you to submit to the director any additional questions or ideas or thoughts you have about some of the things that we've talked about on this agenda item today. And we will include those on an agenda item for our May meeting. And of course, to Ms. Hickox's question, please be thinking about that. I can think of maybe setting year over year calculations, but in addition, I think there might be some benefit in having maybe a 5-year or 3-year period as well. In any event, those are my visceral reactions to that area. Let's take a 10-minute break and reconvene, and we'll pick up with agenda item number 6 when we reconvene, and that invite Ms. Arnold to comment on the council progress. So 10 minutes. I've got about 11:15, a little more than that. Why don't we just say 11:30 for those who would like to take a short break. We'll reconvene at 11:30. Thank you. I'd like to call the commission back to order. I think there are at least one member, maybe two, that might have to attend to other business starting about 12:30. I'm not sure how much longer some of these agenda items are going to take. Most of them are reporting and discussion items rather than action items, but there is one action item I'd like to address, which is agenda item number 11, relating to a revision by the Subaward grant to the Nevada Department of Corrections. So if Director Williams, if you or your staff could present the change or the revision to the Subaward request so the commission can vote on that, I would appreciate it. Are you in a position to pull that up and address that?
For the record, Deputy Director Brian Williams. Yes, sir. I would also like to report that Deputy Director Daniels had to leave. He wasn't feeling well. So he will not be back with us, but we are prepared to proceed in his absence. And as it relates to proposed revision of previously submitted requests for subawards, we have Chris Franklin, our Management Analyst 4, ready to present when you guys are ready.
We are ready if you are ready.
I'll turn it over to Chris, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Hardesty and esteemed members of the Nevada Sentencing Commission. I'm Chris Franklin, Management Analyst 4 for the Nevada Department of Corrections. I'm here to request, we're here to request the Commission's approval for a budget modification to our subaward. As previously expressed to the Commission, 2020 was filled with many different challenges that delayed our state approval authority to begin implementing our goals and deliverables funded by this $231,825 subaward that was graciously awarded to us by this commission. The primary goal and utilization of this funding is to help build an internal infrastructure necessary to implement and sustain quality assurance measures in our division and teams. With our final approval from the Interim Finance Committee on the 27th of last month, we have initiated the hiring process for those positions, and our team has been advised that there are candidates under review at this time. That being said, due to delays encountered, the NDOC would like to request the Commission's approval to reallocate a portion of the awarded funding not currently utilized, which is primarily in the salary and associated costs of the program officer and quality assurance specialist positions, to be utilized in adding a contracted administrative assistant to that budget. This position would be utilized to manage and maintain the administrative and clerical duties that were previously assigned to the contracted quality assurance specialist and program officer positions, thereby allowing them to focus primarily on achieving the deliverables and goals that we set forth in our original application and award. This request does not increase the amount of our budget 1 cent. It is exactly the same. We are just asking to reallocate funding internally within those categories to fund this third position. We have taken the step to already submit this to our outstanding and supportive advisors at the Crime and Justice Institute, and they have also discussed this with the Bureau of Justice Assistance to ensure that our request would meet established reallocation criteria if this request is approved by the Commission today. I thank you very much for your time and consideration, and I stand by for any questions.
Do any Commission members have questions regarding this request? Is there a motion with respect to the request?
I'll make the motion to adopt as requested.
Thank you, Judge Freeman. Is there a second?
It's McCormick, I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay. Are there any commission members opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you for the presentation. I think you're good to go now, Director Williams, with this revision.
Thank you, Chief Justice Hardesty.
Okay, let's move back to agenda item number 6. And as you know, we have been working to implement the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council. Ms. Arnold, our staff attorney at the department, has taken the lead on this. Been meeting with county representatives. Ms. Arnold, would you like to give us an update?
Thank you, Chair Hardesty. I would. Let me share my screen. All right, good morning, commission members. For the record, my name is Laura Arnold. I'm the staff attorney for the Nevada Department of Sentencing Policy, and I'm here with an update on our efforts to facilitate the formation of the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council, which we refer to internally as the Coordinating Council. In December of 2020, Director Gonzalez and I met to discuss a proposed action plan to draw Nevada's County Commission's attention to NRS 176.014 and its requirement on them to appoint their representative members to the Coordinating Council. On January 4th, 2021, we executed on that action plan by sending a letter by US mail and email to each and every county commissioner in Nevada, and by copying each county's manager or acting manager on the letters we sent to the county's commissioners. In our letter, we introduced and explained a bit about the Nevada Sentencing Commission and our newly established department, outlined the mission of the Nevada Sentencing Commission, and highlighted NRS 176.014 and the obligation it created for Nevada's counties to appoint their representative member, coordinating council members. We also requested all coordinating council appointments prior to July 1st, 2021, so that Chief Justice Hardesty could name the coordinating council chair in August, and we could prepare for a September 2021 coordinating council meeting. Almost immediately, we received responses from several counties acknowledging our letter and NRS 176.014. And on January 13th, 2021, we received confirmation of the first coordinating council appointment. White Pine County appointed Deputy District Attorney Mackenzie Hilton. Around that same time, we began calendaring and reviewing county commission meeting agendas for the purpose of tracking the county's attention to the coordinating council and any appointments they were making. By February 4th, 2021, a month after our initial letter and email campaign, a total of 7 members of the coordinating council had been appointed. As of today, we have a total of 9 confirmed coordinating council members. In alphabetical order by county, here are the current coordinating council members appointed by Carson City and by Elko, Esmeralda, Humboldt, Lander, Lincoln, Lyon, Mineral, and White Pine counties. Based on these appointments, the coordinating council is currently comprised of 1 district attorney, 2 deputy district attorneys, 4 current county commissioners, 1 former county commissioner, and a pretrial services program manager. We've been in contact with the current coordinating council members, both individually and collectively, to identify and introduce the coordinating council members to each other as they currently exist, and to inform them of any upcoming events such as today's Sentencing Commission meeting. We've also followed up with most of the counties from which the department has not yet heard or that have not yet put their coordinating council appointments on their upcoming meeting agendas to inquire as to whether they had any updates that we could share with the Sentencing Commission at today's meeting. 3 counties responded and indicated that their representative coordinating council appointments were on the radar and that they would soon be making those appointments. We also noted that another county has their coordinating council appointment on its agenda for its February 22nd, 2021 County Commission meeting. So we expect to have at least 3, if not all 4 of those confirmed appointments by the end of March 2021. We will continue to track these remaining counties' commission meeting agendas for their coordinating council appointments and follow up with them in our ongoing effort to gauge the timing of their required appointments and until all of the required coordinating council members have been appointed. With that, does anyone have any questions?
I don't have any questions. This is Judge Freeman. I'd like to report to you that I somehow found myself on the subcommittee to appoint for Washoe County, along with Chris Hicks and Sheriff Darren Balaam and Chairman Lucy, whereupon we vetted some candidates, and I'm pleased to indicate, although they have not been selected by the county commission, we have identified 2 potential candidates as required for this proposition, and we're hopeful for county commission confirmation when Chairman Lucy gets the opportunity to put them on the agenda. So I wanted to share with everyone that Washoe County has moved forward. We've identified 2 excellent candidates, and we're hopeful for county commission confirmation of those 2. They have accepted the nominations, and I find that they'll be very unique and helpful to the commission. So that would be my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Freeman. Any other comments or questions by members of the commission? All right, thank you, Ms. Arnold. Let's next turn to item number 7. Earlier in the commission's history, we had a presentation from Chuck Calloway regarding certain activities and data that is collected in Clark County. And we reached out to Mr. Hicks and the Washoe County Sheriff's Office to share a similar presentation. So I'd like to invite Lieutenant Corey Solferino of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office to make his presentation to the commission at this time, if he's available.
Justice Hardesty, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Justice Hardesty, members of the committee, Corey Solferino for the record. I'm the current director of the Northern Nevada Regional Intelligence Center. I did have a presentation in interest of time. I know you guys have some of our crime statistics. I'd like to talk about some of the things that we are currently moving forward, some of our crime reduction strategies. And you guys already had a robust overview of the NIBR system, transferring from UCR data and some of that data that we're reporting. So I'd like to give a quick overview of that and then answer or entertain any questions that you guys may have with your permission, sir.
Yes, of course. Please proceed.
On behalf of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Darren Balaam and his executive team, it's a privilege to present before you today. Some of the things that we are looking at regionally with crime is Sheriff Balaam, Chief Soto, the Reno Police Department, and Chief Crawforth of the Sparks Police Department have made an initiative last year on a regional teams collaboration. Under the Northern Nevada Regional Intelligence Center that I currently oversee, we do a regional approach to crime reduction strategies. So from this point moving forward, we currently have officers of all 3 agencies and also our federal counterparts, where we're taking a regional approach to gun initiative crimes, to the gang unit, human exploitation and trafficking, the regional narcotics unit, and the regional crime suppression unit. So on behalf of that initiative, I want to say the last year has been an excellent learning curve and success story after success story by collaborating with our regional partners and not duplicating efforts and sharing information. We've just seen a huge return on investment. I can't thank those leaders of each police department and the sheriff for that collaborative effort. It makes my job very, very, very easy. One of the things too, sir, that we also implemented this just actually a few months ago is our stratified policing initiative. It's taking an evidence-based approach to crime reduction strategies. So rather than just responding to calls for service or investigating crimes after the fact through a traditional detective role, we're using crime analytics, we're using our intelligence analysts and our crime analysts to identify certain patterns in our community. Thereby, once we identify those patterns, we're using place-based practices, we're using person-based practices, and we're using a hotspot policing model to bring attention through community involvement, through targeted enforcement, and through presence in our community. So that just kicked off this past month, and I'll be happy to report our successes upon that moving forward over the next year. One of the things the Sheriff's Office has also done too is publish an end of year report called the State of the Sheriff's Office. It's available online. If you go to washoesheriff.com and you scroll through the search engine, the State of the Sheriff's Office 2020 is on there. It's about a 38-page document that outlines our arrests, our successes, new initiatives that we're bringing forward, like the Veterans Unit, the virtual housing units, some of our opioid crisis and responses to those measures, and all that data is available for you. Also on our Sheriff's Office website, in an effort to be more transparent and an effort to give more information to the community regarding crime trends. It's not up and running yet, but we will have dashboards that will show essentially our NIBRS reporting data. So you'll be able to click on Washoe County. It'll show it specific to the region, Sparks and Reno, and then the entire Northern Nevada Coalition and all the people that are reporting to that NIBRS database, and give you a true representation of what's happening in Northern Nevada with respect to crime. One of the things that I do want to highlight is in August of 2019, we transitioned from UCR summary data to National Incident-Based Reporting System, NIBRS data. It's like comparing apples and oranges. So UCR was very finite, specific crimes reported. NIBRS is the entire dictionary of crimes reported. So it gives a much more robust picture of crime happening in our region. So when we were going through the certification process with the state, Washoe County Sheriff's Office, the Reno Police Department, Sparks Police Department, University of Nevada, Reno Police Department, and our Indian Colony counterparts, the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, Pyramid Lake Police Tribal, all reported our data for 3 months in order to help assist the state get their certification to be a NIBRS state. We did receive that certification through the great work of Mindy McKay and her team down at DPS. So we thank them for their efforts there. And we hope that it'll give a much better, more accurate picture of crime across the entire state to all of the stakeholders in the Nevada legislature. One of the things that we did see were slight upticks and slight downticks in crime, depending upon what we were looking at. But again, specifically what we were looking at is apples and oranges. So 2020 really served as our baseline year for data. And what did 2020 throw us? It threw us COVID. So it gave us some different, I don't want to say misrepresentations, but while people were staying home, they were much more in tune with what was happening when their surroundings. So we had increased calls for service. People were home. So residential burglaries decreased exponentially. You weren't home working during the day, so people were less likely to be victimized. DUIs, for the most part, went down exponentially. We had less people out on the road. We had less tourism, less people entertaining in bars due to the bars shut down. So consequently, our DUI arrests went down exponentially. Our motor vehicle thefts went down exponentially. Some of the things that we did towards the end of the lockdown start seeing increasing was our domestic violence cases. We had people obviously that were confined to their homes, so we were trying to provide more services, more victim support services for those people who weren't able to get out, and that resulted in a domestic violence offense. So those were some of the trends from 2020 that we did see. As I go through some of the data and just want to hit on some of the highlights, one of the things that we look at when we compare data is against 4-year historical averages. So we go back to 2016 through the calendar year, and we compare week to week, month to month, year to year to make sure that there's not any anomalies as far as our reporting data, to make sure that we're not addressing certain crime trends in our community. One of the things that we saw increase towards the end of 2020 last year was assault and batteries, and also our vehicle burglaries. As people were trying to respect all of the lockdown orders and the lack of travel, they did go to the outside doors to recreate, whether that was shooting, hiking. They took to the outdoors and to our trailheads. Unfortunately, what happens with that is predators will take time to go and victimize people. So if you have valuables, if you don't lock your vehicle, what tends to happen is people will go and be the victim of a vehicle burglary. So we did see vehicle burglaries creep up towards the end of 2020 due to that specific incident. The domestic violence, it was within 30 arrests from the previous year of last year. So we were capped off at about 330 compared to an annual historical average of about 313. So those are things that we want to address next year moving forward with stratified policing. The sheriff has prioritized what our significant incidents are and how we're responding to those data to ensure that we're giving our officers out in the field the appropriate tools that they need to respond, and that we're taking a community-centered approach to that. So we're not just doing one finite strategy. We're actually implementing about 4 different policing strategies based upon evidence in an effort to bring crime down in Northern Nevada. I've had some extensive talks with Deputy Chief Thu of the Reno Police Department and Chief Crawforth of the Sparks Police Department. They're very interested in our successes with stratified policing, and we're hoping that NRIC, the Northern Nevada Regional Intelligence Center, can serve as that hub and deploy those methodologies across all jurisdictions. I know that's rather large overview, sir, and kind of just wanted to give a historical context to what we're doing, what we're tracking, and how we're reporting it. But I suspect through my counterpart, Jenny Noble, that my presence was requested more for questions and answers than a presentation. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on the committee's behalf.
Let me open up, see if there are any questions from commission members. Do any commission members have any questions for the lieutenant? Okay, Lieutenant, I don't see any. I just would observe, first of all, I want to thank you for the thorough presentation. I was interested in one of the comments you made. It kind of related to Ms. Hickok's comments earlier. The changeover in the reporting to NIBUS, or however you pronounce that, an acronym, from where we were before. Since we were operating under the older system, can you make a comparison between statistics that are generated under one versus the other? What's your impression of that subject? We were asked about addressing year-over-year percentage changes, year-over-year calculations. Would those get conflated because of the different types of reporting systems that were used?
Excellent question, Justice Hardesty. Corey Solferino for the record. Yes. So we're going through the training with the FBI and this conversion from Uniform Crime Report summary data to NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System data, much more robust. NIBRS tracks 62 different Part A and Part B offenses, whereas off the top of my head, I want to say UCR only tracked 8 Part 1 offenses, basically your violent crimes. So one of the things that our analysts have done is in an effort to give Sheriff Balaam and the chiefs of the region the best information they need regarding crime reduction strategies and what's really happening in our region, is we are trying to pull all that data and summarize it. The way that our current records management system operates, we currently use a Tiburon system. We use that across the region. So it's nice, at least while we're still moving towards a state initiative to use and share criminal justice information systems, at least the Northern Nevada entities are using the same system to pull that data. So one of my crime analysts is very good at his craft, and what he does is he tries to pull all that information. So we're trying to capture all the UCR data from years past to be able to compare it to that NIBRS data. It doesn't match up identically, so there are some inflated numbers. When we did go through the training with the feds and when we did go live with the NIBRS transition, we were trying to be transparent with the public and pushed out press releases regarding crime trends and analysis and how there would be certain spikes in crime. Case in point, UCR data didn't track arson. So a lot of our fires over the summer that we were identifying as arson looked like we had a 400% increase in arson over the last year because it wasn't something that we tracked previously. So as we get through those issues and we talk to the media and we push out press releases, 2020 really gave us that first year baseline moving forward of what it's going to look like. We still compare against 4-year historical averages as best we can. As those years start to fall off, moving forward from 2020, we'll have a much more accurate picture of how we're reporting and what our crime trends are looking like.
Thank you for the answer. So I was going to lead to that, and you kind of answered it. It sounds like 2020 would be the better base year as we begin to look at year-over-year changes and percentage changes. Is that right?
Yes, Justice Hardesty, Corey Solferino for the record, absolutely. 2020 served as that base year, and COVID did present us some different challenges with why we were over-reporting some things and under-reporting others. As we start to open up the state and the country, I think we'll get a much more accurate picture, but January 2020 is that baseline moving forward that we'll be able to actually do a robust comparative analysis.
And then just one example of this, of the work you're doing there. On page 7 of your slide presentation, you are discussing crime categories by year to date. And I was struck by the dramatic drop in DUIs from 2016 to 2020. I guess my first reaction is that right? And then secondly, what do you attribute this to? Maybe the pandemic, but still, that's a rather dramatic drop in DUIs and encouraging to see.
Yes, sir. Justice Hardesty, Corey Solferino for the record. DUIs have been trending down over the years. As you know, certain legislative mandates and implementations in the DUI process has made prosecution a little bit more difficult moving forward. I'm not saying that we're not out there observing less, but our officers have specific targeted enforcement campaigns through DUI joining forces. For the last 5 years, we've been able to use money from the Office of Traffic Safety at the federal level to go out and do specific targeted enforcement. So our officers are out there. They are actively out looking for DUI crimes, and we do have task force members who get paid directly to do that. I think it's the perfect storm of a bunch of things going on. Just this year, we were able to get back to our 2008 staffing levels due to the recession. So it's taken us almost 12 years to recover to where we were in 2008. So now we're back to those staffing levels. If you look at historical averages, best practices recommend 2 officers for every 1,000 population. We're sitting at about 1.21 in Washoe County. So we are very, very underrepresented as far as the national best practices for officers to street ratio. So as we start to implement these different crime reduction strategies and calls for service increase, that leaves us less time to do proactive enforcement, which is where our DUI offenses come into play, as officers out there looking for impaired drivers and conducting traffic stops. As they get pulled in different directions, they don't have the ability to go out and use that unaccounted for time that they can use proactive policing are when they're going call to call to call. So we try to bridge that gap with grant funded overtime and the ability to target that. But those numbers do speak for themselves, sir. It's a significant decrease in arrests and cases.
The ratio that you just referenced, is that just the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, or is that all law enforcement, RPD, SPD in Washoe County?
Yes, sir. Corey Solferino for the record. It's just the sheriff's office, but I do believe I can speak on behalf of Reno and Sparks too. They are well under the 2 per 1,000 demographic too. I don't know exactly. I want to say they're in the neighborhood of 1.5. Specifically, Sparks Police Department, they're going through a robust hiring campaign right now, as we all are. We have 22 different deputy sheriffs in the academy right now. I want to say that we just hired another 6 lateral officers that already have their post certificate from outside of our agency, and Reno and Sparks are doing an aggressive lateral campaign as well. So while we're sitting pretty good as far as our vacancies and planned retirements and trying to plug in those holes, recruiting is a struggle. I got the opportunity to present in front of the Assembly Judiciary Committee on Monday, and Assemblyman Wheeler asked about recruiting and retention. It's difficult times. Just for comparison, sir, in 2006, I was the background investigator for our agency doing pre-employment investigations. We used to get anywhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,500 applicants every time we opened up for a recruitment. This last recruitment, we had less than 300 people apply. So we're looking in different measures and recruiting in different ways. We've chaired a new Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We're working hand in hand with Human Resources and our city counterparts to go out and recruit different demographics, different areas outside of the area to make sure that we have the best and the brightest and out on the street protecting our communities.
Are you familiar with the ratios in Clark and in the rural counties at all?
The ratios to what, sir, as far as how they're doing on open vacancies?
Yeah, the ratio of number of officers per 1,000 inhabitants.
I don't, sir, but I could get with Executive Director Eric Spratley from Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs and pull some of that information and submit it to the committee.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any further questions for the lieutenant? Yes, Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Chair. Corey, I just had one question building off what you just said. What do you suspect, or what's your theory as to that significant drop in applicants for your profession?
Excellent question, DA Hicks. This is Corey Solferino for the record. I think it's a perfect storm of things, sir. I think it's over time, some of the benefit packages that are pervert to myself and other people who were hired pre-1997, 1999, where we can retire, with a full benefit package, 25 years and out in healthcare. Some of those have been amended throughout the years where, I may not make as much working in a government position as I would in the private sector, but I got the opportunity to retire early with a full pension package. Some of those provisions have been removed moving forward. You see that, with the summer of social justice and some of the different police reform tactics, a lot of people are hesitant to enter the profession. I think it's an opportunity for us. I had the opportunity to represent Sheriff Balaam through the legislative session, the last several sessions, and Sheriff Chuck Allen before that. And even as an intern, had the opportunity to work under Deputy Attorney General Rhonda Clifton and Frankie Sue Del Papa to look at the legislative process. So I've been in this for a long time. And as I've gone through the years and been able to present to them and talk about AB3 that happened over the summer, we truly have an opportunity for criminal justice renaissance or rebranding of what we're doing. Unfortunately, those events that happened 2,200 miles away from our jurisdiction set the standard for the rest of the state, but it sets us in a positive direction for reform initiatives and for working on certain things that have plagued our community. With Jenny Noble, sir, myself, Mary Sarah, Chuck Calloway, when we go to the legislature, we talk about the issues with Northern Nevada, with the Washoe County Detention Facility and the Clark County Detention Facility being two of the largest mental health facilities in the state. We need help with mental health counseling, clinicians. We need help with substance abuse addiction. We hope that those robust changes that we helped author with AB 236 last session bring some of those things to the forefront and get some of those monies that are saved on building prisons to treatment programs so we don't have that revolving door syndrome. It's just back to your point, though, it's the perfect storm, sir. We don't have a whole lot of interest right now in law enforcement. It's a wonderful profession. It's a time-honored tradition. I'm proud to do it 22 years now moving forward, and I've probably got at least another 8. I've got a 11-year-old in 5th grade. So my wife and I are happy to serve in this community and move forward, but we just need to be attractive to that new generation. And for whatever reason, we lost some of our luster.
Well, we remain happy to have you. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for answering that.
Thank you, sir.
I'll certainly endorse that comment. Any other questions or comments for the lieutenant? All right, thank you, Corey, very much. Appreciate you being available and patiently waiting until we could get to this agenda item. Let's now turn to agenda item number 8, a review of the October 2020 prison population projections by the JFA Institute.
Thank you, Chair. I've included in your meeting materials all the statutes that are relevant to the JFA projections and how they are used in this state. One of the things that that came up at our last meeting was how the JFA projections are used, how they're used in the state, and possibly how they could be best used for this commission. In your materials, as I said, there's a list of the statutes as I provided. Some of these statutes specifically govern the projections. Some govern the budget. I also include the statute that requires this commission to use the projections. What I'm going to do is going to explain the statutes that govern the projections and how those projections correspond to the timeframes of the state budget. NRS 176-0129 requires the governor's finance office to enter into a contract for annual projections. As of right now, that contract is with JFA. NRS 176-0139 requires the governor's finance office to provide the projections to the Nevada Sentencing Commission. The introduction to the projections, as they have been provided to you in your meeting materials, identifies that each report as being a forecast cycle or forecast. I may happen to refer to them as a report. I wanted to make it clear that for the purpose of my presentation, these terms are interchangeable. So going back to the statute between GFO and JFA, the contract indicates that JFA will provide 3 forecasts which correspond to timeframes of the state's budget. Because the projections correspond to the timeframes of the state budget, this means they are not necessarily available to the public as soon as they are released. There are 3 timeframes worth noting. First, the agency's requested budget. The kickoff in February of an even-numbered year begins the agency's requested budget. During this time, the information related to the agency's requested budget is confidential. After the agency's budget is sent to LCB before October 15th, then those items related to the request are available to the public if you see NRS 353-211. The next time frame of the budget is the governor's recommended budget phase. Until the governor sends the recommended budget to the legislature, information is considered confidential. Subsection 3 of NRS 353-205. The final time frame of the budget is when the budget is before the legislature. So now going back to those 3 forecasts or reports that are generated by JFA. There's one in April, October, and February. The April report of an even-numbered year aligns with the agency recommended phase. This means the projections from April are not public until the agency requested budget is sent to LCB, October 15th. I made a visual here. The statute is not specific to the JFA projections, but it guides us into how we use them. So I just want to make that clear. There's nothing that says that these are explicitly confidential, but as they align to the budget is how we determine their status of what we can share with the public. See. Oh, you can't see it. Up there? Oh, yeah, I can't see it up there. Just one second. Try it again. Could you see it on yours? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Hopefully, I did not provide this in your materials. Hoping you can, will you go switch this view? Let's make sure we can see. Oh, my screen. Okay. So I made this diagram to identify to outline the phases of the budget and how the JFA projections align. As I said, again, this isn't explicit in the statute, but because these projections correspond to different phases of the budget is how I've come to how we're going to treat them as far as the status of their confidentiality. So as you can see here, the October projections are used during the governor's recommended budget phase. This means the October projections are not generally considered public as part of those materials until mid-January when the budget is transmitted to the legislature. This usually happens around the time of the State of the State address by the governor. The February projections are the legislatively approved projections used for the legislatively approved budget. So I believe that these will be available to the public as soon as the budget is approved, but they may be available sooner. So considering the understanding of the projections and how they correspond to the budget timeframes, later this year, I'm going to propose to this commission a change on how these projections are used to calculate the projected amount of cost avoided. At a previous meeting, we presented a methodology that could be used with calculating the projected amount of cost avoided and how to best use these projections. As we learn more about how the projections correspond to the budget and how to use them in the most effective way possible, I am putting together possible changes that might be best to help support this commission in identifying those costs avoided. Because we've used these previously to identify savings and investment, I want to make sure that we have them aligned just as they're aligned with the state's budget. I'm going to continue to collaborate with the governor's finance office as they're the ones that contract with JFA regarding these projections, so that I can continue to understand how these timeframes are related and how they can be best used to support this commission. Next, I will provide a very high-level outline of the contents of the projections. Clearly, I am not an expert. I did not put these together, but I wanted to walk the commission through them so that you know what you're looking at when you're reviewing them. And I like you to think of it as a roadmap so that when we use these in the future, you know what you're looking for. So with the projections that are in front of this commission today, what's unique about them is what's at the very front of the projections is the special analysis. As we can see, JFA is taking into consideration what the impact of COVID-19 is going to be on the prison populations. On the prison population. So for this commission, that's going to be using this along with other data about how to determine what the trends are regarding the prison populations. The commission is tasked with tracking and assessing the outcomes of the population and identifying potential cost savings. And the way that the commission is required to do that by statute is by using these projections. So we can see JFA is already providing some insight about how they are using that when they are reporting the information in these projections. You can see there's an introduction in the projection that notes the history of the legislative changes that will have an impact on the prison populations. You will also note in the introduction that the projections note that AB 236 is being taken in consideration, and they're going to look at specific impacts of AB 236 and trends they see there. You can see they identify specifically which areas of AB 236 correspond to their data systems and which areas they will be able to track. As you go through the report, you can see there's a background and how their system is used. We can see trends in population and crime as they look at those comparisons between the crime rates and the population. The JFA provides comparison to previous projections. We can see there are trends related to admissions, parole releases, prison inmate population, and length and stay. There are projection assumptions. As the statute requires, the vendor that puts together these projections is supposed to put together a 10-year outlook of what the anticipated population, the prison population, is to be, for the purpose of helping establish the budget and figure out the costs that are going to be needed related to incarceration. So in that section of the report, we can see possible future release rates, future admission counts, future parole revocations, and what the projected male and female population is. I would like to note too, at the end of the report, again, they are on page 39 of the report, JFA notes that they are looking at, they're not quite sure how long it's going to take. I guess the assumption is that the impact from COVID-19 and the impact on the prison population has had an impact on the prison population, and that there's going to be a correction at some point. So there has been a decrease. And so the assumption in the report makes it clear or assumes that there will be a correction at some point, that the prison population will then increase as a correction to what's happened in relation to COVID-19. And they're specific that they're going to be tracking that. So again, that information might be helpful to the commission as we review these projections in the future. And we know that this is in process. So we know there's another set of projections that will be coming out this month. And as they correlate to the legislative budget, I will make those available to the commission as they are available to the public. And then we can continue to look at those over time and determine how best to use those as the commission's looking at the different areas of data to make recommendations and look at trends that we see in terms of the prison population. As I said, I'm not the expert on this report, but as far as how these projections are used, how the commission uses these projections and anything else related to that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Before we get into questions by commissioners, I wanted to share some information with you. I think that it is increasingly clear that there are a number of cases, criminal cases throughout the state, certainly in the urban counties, that have been delayed in being resolved because of the backlog, or I should say the issues in the court system being able to either conduct trials or proceed with the disposition of those cases. That has certainly influenced the admissions within the prison. And I think that it is an area that we need to address along the lines of a course correction that the director has just referenced. This is going to require some extensive study. And I have recently been contacted by CJI as well as BJA extending a potential opportunity for us to try to analyze the impact of the pandemic and the backlog of cases that exist within our criminal justice system at the moment on what we can see going forward. I've also reached out to Dr. Austin. I haven't spoken to him yet, but I want to get him involved in that conversation because I think it's going to be important for us, particularly the Sentencing Commission, to make sure we aren't wrong-footed in what's happening with respect to prison admissions that are being influenced not necessarily by crime or AB 236 approaches, but are rather being influenced just simply because of the safety measures the courts have had to implement that have limited or prevented a number of cases from going forward. As an example, I was informed by the DA's office yesterday in Clark County that the number of murders pending in Clark County for disposition are 400 at this time. And I think there are a larger number of other non-murder type cases, non-homicide cases that are in a similar situation. So I think this is an area that will require some expertise from some of the people that crunch these numbers and evaluate these impacts. And I'm hoping by the May meeting to have a specific set of proposals that the commission can take a look at that we may be able to take advantage of and frankly get the benefit of the same kinds of resources that we received before when some of the numbers were crunched when AB 236 was considered. Obviously, the commission will weigh in on any such proposals that we might recommend to the governor. With that, I want to invite any other questions or comments from commission members for the director or for me, or we can continue, and I think we need to continue this topic forward to the May meeting for sure. Are there any comments or questions for the director? Yes, Sheriff, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you for on me. I think this is going to be several years. I don't think it's just going to be the transfer of UCR to NIBRS and setting a baseline, because the baseline itself is counted upon in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if it's as just a suggestion, if there's a way either through the courts or through the District Attorneys Association for them to define and I think this is going to be the hardest part. Was the crime committed before the pandemic was declared, during the declared pandemic, after the declared pandemic, and then when the adjudication comes forward, for us in order to be able to track those numbers to see if there really is a spike or not. And we're doing that while still trying to do a AB 236 parameter of what changes did that affect to the system at the same time when the system is a ebb and flow water down the river. And I want to be able to, as we make decisions or try to make policy decisions, know that it's accurate and trying to, I know you can't predict everything, but trying to establish those timelines, and you said the 1, 3, 5, 10 years windows of crimes, I think it's all going to have to come together. And I think patience is probably the best call at this time.
Sheriff, I don't think I could have framed the problem any better than you just did. That is precisely the problem that I foresee. Obviously, the longer the pandemic goes, or the longer safety measures have to be used that constrict the ability of the courts to proceed with the disposition of these cases, the greater the challenges we will experience. But you're absolutely right. We need to compare apples to apples, and that is an important part of this entire discussion. And as I was discussing with CJI literally 3 days ago, that is exactly the point. When was the crime committed? When was the disposition? And what periods of time does it fall in before the pandemic, during the pandemic? And also, too, were the crimes committed at a point where they're governed by AB 236 or not? That's a critical question in order to be able to assess how this works. And I think what all of this means is it complicates a lot of this data collection even more. So it's going to require a significant level of resource that the state does not have, that we might be able to take advantage of to assist us. And the commission could provide a lot of direction in how we accumulate that. So I view this as an opportunity. I have to say to me, it's a really challenging question that you framed, but I think it's exactly the problem that we're looking at. And I don't think we can make confident recommendations about the impact of AB 236 with all these other things that are in play without dividing them out. So I really appreciate your observation. Anybody else wish to have any input or comment at this time? It's going to be a robust part of our conversation in May, I'll tell you that. Okay, I don't see any Ms. Gonzalez, so let's go on to agenda item number 9. I circulated an article or asked staff to do so out of the Prison Policy Initiative because it caught my eye about the parole hearings in various states, including Nevada. And I trust you all have had an opportunity to take a look at that article, but I wanted to invite Chair DeRico to comment about the article and about the suggestion that Nevada's number of parole hearings and parole rates had declined significantly between 2019 and 2020, so that we could shed context onto this topic. Chair?
There he is.
Chair, are you there?
Okay. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Chris DeRico for the record. So, yes, when I saw this article on the agenda, of course, I read through this. And I think kind of as you mentioned previously on our last agenda item, we need to be able to compare apples to apples. And it's very difficult in reading this article in order to do so. Throughout this article, I got that and I understand that some of the Department of Corrections, their parole boards are a part of their Department of Corrections. We're an independent body here. And some things at least that I want to point out here for the record is the statistics in here that they have based on Nevada are on a calendar year, and we do everything on a fiscal year. And I can tell you that for fiscal year 2020, let me step back even previous to that. Our grant rate in fiscal year 2018 was 62.9%. In fiscal year 2019, it was 65%. In fiscal year 20, and this is one of those with an asterisk, which I'll explain, the grant rate was actually 71%. So our grant rate has not gone down. And once again, it might be how they're comparing, put together the stats to try compare apples and oranges. I do want to point out for the record, in March of this year, March of last year, when COVID hit, the institutions ultimately closed their doors to outsiders in order to mitigate the exposure, which was a very smart move. However, in Nevada, and according to statute, our parole boards must be open to the public. So no longer could supporters, attorneys, victims go to the institutions for these hearings. Additionally, shortly thereafter, the governor closed the state offices down from mid-March until the end of May. And so we were left with somewhat of a quandary of figuring out what to do. Certainly, we did not, as a board, want to go dark and do nothing and not be able to move forward with the opportunity for some of these individuals to be granted parole. As a result of that, what we did was we were able to review all of the files as a board between mid-March and the end of May, hand review all the files. According to NRS, we can grant parole in absentia. We cannot deny parole in absentia. So we went through every file that we could who was eligible for parole during that time period. And we can't review cases that have victims, known victims that have requested to either be present or provide any type of input on hearings as well. So we reviewed all of those cases and went through everyone. And so for the months of April and May, you have an anomaly that happened. That was, in those 2 months, we had a 100% grant rate. And the reason being is you cannot deny in absentia, but we can grant. So we looked at the cases that were that looked like good candidates to grant because we wanted the wheels to continue to keep moving, and we did. Certainly, once our office or the governor released the restrictions on the office closures effective June 1, we were that day open and ready to go for the public, and things went back to normal. An interesting note here, once again, our grant rates went up, but that was because of those 2.5 months of 2 months of 100% grant rate. Once offices opened back up, we started to see our grant rates go back to where they were historically for the first half of fiscal year 21. We're back to 64% total grant rate. As far as total numbers of grants, I can tell you that the prison population, I believe, as a part of the last JFA report, has declined approximately 11% in the last year. We don't determine when an inmate is eligible for parole. That's done by the Nevada Department of Corrections. They're the timekeepers. They notify us when they're eligible, and then we make sure to hear that case. So the prison population has been going down. So if we're talking total numbers of people granted, I wouldn't disagree that the total numbers have been reduced, but the percentage has held steady or even gone up somewhat in the fiscal year 20. And those are the main things that I wanted to bring up with regard to this article.
Thank you, Chairman. Do any members of the commission have any questions for the chairman about this topic? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to agenda item number 10. Along with all of the other things that the staff has been doing, they have been now embarking on trying to keep track of what's taking place in the legislature. As I'm sure most of the people on this commission know, that's a challenge in and of itself and can be a full-time job in and of itself. I've asked Victoria to give us a 30,000 foot view of what they have seen thus far and kind of update us on what the commission's interaction and tracking of the legislature looks like.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. We have initially, like as I mentioned in my report, we were tracking interim committees in terms of looking through the scope and the lens of what is mandated and required for this commission. And so I have actually asked Laura to put together a presentation and a summary of what our process was and where we're at. When she's done, I will provide some information related to the budget hearing presentation that I made to the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Committee, and as a conclusion to our activities related to the legislature. So with the permission of the chair, I'll turn the time over to Laura.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Gonzalez. Again, for the record, my name is Laura Arnold. I'm staff attorney for the Nevada Department of Sentencing Policy, and I want to share my screen with you once more. All right, so I'm going to update you on the department's legislative tracking efforts. So prior to the 81st session of the Nevada legislature, Director Gonzalez and I met to discuss the department's legislative tracking plans in the context of the Nevada Sentencing Commission's statutory duties and reporting requirements stated in NRS 176.100134, 176.01343, and 176.01347. Generally, those statutory mandates require this commission to recommend, evaluate, facilitate, train, and report as follows. The commission makes recommendations related to elements of the criminal justice system that affect criminal sentences, the structure of criminal sentencing that incorporates the objectives and goals of fairness, consistency, and proportionality, and statutory sentencing guidelines. The commission evaluates sentencing policies and practices related to efficacy and fiscal considerations, as well as the impact of sentencing program options. The commission facilitates the development and maintenance of a statewide sentencing database. The commission provides training regarding sentencing and related issues, policies, and practices. The commission provides reports that comprehensively address sentencing changes and recommendations, track and assess comparative sentencing data based on statutory data measures, and provide the projected and actual fiscal effects of sentencing reform efforts. The commission also advises the department in how to best assist the commission in ensuring its compliance with its duties, requirements, and objectives. With the commission's duties, requirements, and objectives in mind, our legislative tracking plan began by first breaking down AB 236, and we did that in two ways. First, we listed each NRS chapter and provision that was affected by AB 236. Then we created a separate spreadsheet that provided a substantive summary description of each section of AB 236 and the effect that it had. Our intent was to have that information as a resource to which we could refer in our legislative tracking efforts, both now and in the future. Next, we began what has been an ongoing review of all of the bill draft requests that have been and continue to be submitted to determine which of them, based on their brief descriptions, might possibly relate to Nevada's criminal justice system generally and criminal sentencing specifically in the context of all that this commission is tasked with doing. With that broad filter, and as of today, we identified 242 bill draft requests to track and then review as they are assigned bill numbers and introduced. We track and review those bill draft requests through the Nellis Personal Legislative Tracking feature, which provides daily updates on the bill draft requests that are introduced as legislation. Once a bill draft request is introduced as legislation, we review the bill in its entirety and through our broad filter of whether it could or will affect that which this commission is tasked with doing. If it in any way relates directly or remotely to this commission's duties and objectives, we add that bill to our legislative tracking workbook and through Nellis, track that bill through the legislative process. The information we include about each bill in our legislative tracking workbook includes, in relevant part and among other things, a descriptive summary of the bill, whether it affects any NRS provision identified in AB 236, how or why it may or does relate to criminal sentencing policies or issues, and its progress through the legislative process. Through that process, which we undertake daily, we have currently identified 31 bills that we are tracking as they make their way through the legislative process. Of the bills that we are currently tracking, as with those that we expect to be tracking once they are assigned to pending bill draft requests, some are more likely to affect matters relevant to the commission than others. For instance, some directly bear on criminal sentences by increasing penalties for offenses, while others may indirectly impact criminal sentencing issues by potentially increasing or decreasing arrests and convictions. Other examples of our reasons for tracking certain bills include those that address treatment programs within the Department of Corrections, require certain training for employees in the criminal justice system, or affect NRS provisions that are identified in our AB 236 breakdown. As the bills we are tracking make their way through the legislative process and we are able to further evaluate them based upon testimony and presentations, legislator questions and discussion, and other information, we will continue to adjust our consideration of those bills in the context of the Sentencing Commission's duties and objectives and rank them accordingly. When Nevada's 81st legislative session has concluded, we'll provide our final evaluation of the relevant legislation that passes and any impact of that legislation to the Commission's duties, objectives, and mission. We will also seek guidance and recommendations from the Commission as to what else it may want from our legislative tracking efforts. So with that, are there any questions about our legislative tracking process or any guidance at this point from the Commission to incorporate into our efforts going forward?
I'd like to offer some guidance. I think it would be beneficial to all of the members of the Commission if you could distribute weekly the status of your current bills being tracked. Not beyond, I don't want to add because we have a limited staff as it is, but the summary that you have here on the last slide, if we can just update that weekly, if you add a bill or remove a bill, at least the commission members will see which bills you're following or deleting. And I think then commission members, it'll be up to you to take your own initiative or through your own associations, look up these bills and their status. And if you want to ask questions of the department, then we can provide additional information as appropriate to address those questions. I imagine for many on the commission, you already are looking at these matters in your own offices or associations, but I think it might be informative and help communicate if the commission staff can just send out this sort of tracking summary weekly. And thank you, Ms. Arnold, for your work in this. It's quite challenging. Do any commission members have any additional questions or comments about this practice? Let's see. Hearing none, I don't know.
Yeah.
We need to see if there's anybody raising their hand. I'm not sure if I can tell.
It's not going to, it's not highlighting.
Okay. Then I'll assume that's the case, that we don't have any additional questions for Ms. Arnold. While we're trying to get back to the gallery view, Ms. Gonzalez, if you'd like to go forward.
Thank you, Chair. We just want to make sure we didn't neglect anybody. Thank you. Included in your materials is the presentation I made to the legislature, specifically the Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committees. The chair appeared with me. As each agency is required to do, agencies are invited to make their budget presentations to the committees at various points during the legislature. We got to do ours the first week. And so what I do for that presentation is I provided information about our statutory mandates, our current budget. I provided a summary of our activities of standing up the department, including impacts from the pandemic. Most of the items included in our budget request sought to replace the funds we lost during our base year, which happened to be during the worst of the state being shut down. We were impacted by not being able to hire and not being able to spend. And so we were not able to use funds that had been appropriated to the department, which would then have been shown in our base year of what kind of appropriations we need for our daily functions. The good news is our request also includes our request to a reclassification of our administrative assistant 4. We are requesting that this position be reclassified to a management analyst 1 position, also referred to as an MA1. Our intent by seeking this reclassification is the position will increase the level of work that we're able to accomplish as it relates to the data collection. Again, we aren't able to ask for an additional full-time position at this point because of the cap that is on our request, but we were able to ask for this reclassification, which will help facilitate our work and help take us to another level of what we're able to get done. Most recently, I was asked by LCB to submit an expanded program narrative regarding the budget of our department. This is also referred to as the EPN. The EPN includes a detailed information about our budget. I will be submitting this to the Ways and Means Committee next week, and the intent is that it will assist the committee in reviewing our agency budget. As the chair mentioned as well, we received some questions from the committee members, and definitely appreciation for what we are trying to do and identifying, as we're trying to identify savings, we need money in order to identify those savings and understand and appreciate the needs, and as they relate to data specifically, as we know resources are important and necessary to get this work done. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions about my presentation to the money committees, or if there's any other questions about our legislative tracking.
Any questions or comments from commission members? All right, seeing and hearing none, then let's move on to agenda item number 12. As we have done in the past, I would invite any suggestions that any members of the commission have for future agenda items. If you don't have a suggestion today, but one, of course, occurs to you before our next meeting, please reach out to the executive director or myself, and we will make arrangements to include that in the construct of the agenda. Is there anybody who would like to make any suggestion on a topic or topics at this point today? Okay, hearing and seeing none, then let's move on to our second public comment period. I'll open that comment period as we did in the first period. Those who wish to testify may do so by telephone. Due to time constraints, public comment will be limited to 2 minutes. Any member of the public that exceeds the 2-minute limit, you may submit additional testimony or all of your testimony in writing to the Department of Sentencing Policy at sentencingpolicy@ndsp.nv.gov. So at this time, Ms. Buckley, if you would open the lines for public comment.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name for the record. Again, if there is anybody of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name.
Chair, at this time, it looks like we do not have anybody waiting in the queue. Would you like to wait a minute or two to see if anybody else joins before concluding the meeting, adjourning the meeting?
Sure, we'll wait a couple minutes. Members, thank you, commission members, for your patience. We don't see any individuals seeking to offer comment during the second comment period. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting and thank you all for your time and participation and look forward to seeing you in May. Obviously, I've invited a number of, invited each of you, if you wish, to offer suggestions on agenda items and to further comment on other matters. So we look forward to hearing from you if you have time to do so. Thank you very much for your time and have a good weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.